You'll tonight, if you follow this whole Periscope, and I'm going to ask you to retweet this puppy, and it's not the first time I'm going to ask you. I am just committed tonight to get this all out. I'm committed to get the entire big thing, and I'm going to use visual aids. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be showing you web pages. I'm going to go through in detail every single thing I'm going to tell you. With that in mind, this is the one they will Gary Webb me for. This right here, this podcast, this is going to be me getting the whole thing out. So download it and stick it on a thumb drive somewhere in a drawer where you think the police state that is now here in the United States won't be able to find it. And if you don't think we're in a police state right now, wake up and let's go over stuff. This is where it starts to get very, very deep. And this is the part where it also gets very dangerous, because the part that I'm about to talk to you about is the part that would sound crazy were it not something that you could easily find out and prove yourself. And this has to do with the fact that what you are dealing with here is a conspiracy of secret societies. That is, in fact, what you are dealing with here. I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to point out that I'm about to show and prove this to you. This is not anything that's actually in doubt or a theory. It's something that we know to be true. What you are witnessing here on a large scale is a conspiracy put forth by people associated with secret societies, people who have membership in literal secret societies, such as Skull and Bones at Yale, like John Kerry. This also involves the Bushes, who were members of Skull and Bones. Okay. Now, I'm going to say this again. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's an actual conspiracy. Skull and Bones is real. Everybody who I just mentioned, plus people like Stephen Mnuchin, the current Treasury Secretary, hold on, because he's one of the snakes in the Trump administration. And that's not an accident, because these are people literally associated with secret societies. And one of the things we will talk about here, and again, I just want to be as clear as possible. This is a very dangerous periscope, because I'm going to show you that you can figure this all out factually, that you don't have to say one thing incorrect or conjectural or anything to figure it out, I think. So let's bring up a clip here. Let's see what we got Anthony Sutton talking about here. He's talking about Skull and Bones.
Well, Tony, I think that in conclusion, it's very important that we understand how you develop in your third book, which is about to come out, the development of conflict to produce war or peace that they're choosing, and how that has worked, let's say, in Vietnam or in the situations that are occurring today in the Middle East, where there is great conflict. How is the order managing the conflict we see on the globe today?
Well, it's, as I mentioned before, basically it is using the Hegelian dialectic. You establish one side, then you establish the other side, then you bring them into conflict, then you manage that conflict. So you establish Soviet Union, you establish Hitler, you bring them into conflict, World War II. By managing the conflict, you can control the next decade or so. And as I mentioned, we built up the Soviet Union. We're building up China today, communist China.
Evelyn de Rothschild joins us now to talk about investing in China and his latest venture, Weather Central, here as well. So, Evelyn, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I just want to get your views on how things have evolved. Has it become a more open society? Has it become an easier place to do business?
Oh, I think it is, no doubt. I think it's a remarkable country. When you think of what has happened in the last 10 years, let alone 20 years, is an achievement beyond recognition.
I'm Richard Rockefeller. I'm chair of the board of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. The sentiments that my grandfather and grandmother and actually other relatives of that generation had for China, very positive feelings for the country, passed through the generations to all of us. So China, in a way, wasn't such an unfamiliar place to us as it might have felt for a lot of Americans.
What What sort of a financial deal should Obama be seeking to strike when he travels to China next month?
No, I think this would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order.
Sir Evelyn, what about the RMB situation? You mentioned a so-called currency problem. I mean, do you see the day in the next 5 years where it's fully convertible and flexible?
Well, you're talking to a person who's quite old. If I'm around in 5 years, I'd like to think that that is the case. I think we've all got to move towards that opportunity, and I think the challenge also is whether we should move towards an international currency.
But they really are issues of the construction of a new world order. That's what this is about. And that's the sort of dialogue the Chinese are generally good at. And so a partnership between us is essential. A conflict between us is going to exhaust us both in tactical exercises that cannot be conclusive.
And the New World Order could satisfy both.
It has to satisfy both, because otherwise it will lead to tensions that will exhaust us both.
One has to give credit to President Nixon's and Henry Kissinger's initiative. They broke the ice. They did. But they confronted a residue of suspicion, and that suspicion was mutual, and grievances. And they were also mutual, that it really took time for the relationship to sort of become more normal, more predictable. And eventually what we accomplished was that it became, in fact, open and full, comprehensive, and in fact initiated a kind of secret collaboration, or even perhaps you could call it an alliance.
Yale Daily News, specifically number 96 from February 29th, 1972, that is available for reading online on the Yale Library, digital library. And it contains a front page story, a very interesting one, called Yale Group Spurs Mao's Emergence. And it states William F. Buckley was not the only Yale figure connected with the presidential trip to China, of course referring to the then recent trip to China of President Nixon. Without Yale's support, Mao Zedong may have never risen from obscurity to command China. Jonathan Spence, professor of Chinese history, was the first to discover Mao Zedong's connection with Yale. The professor noted, in 1919, Mao, age 26, was in Changsha, having finished his middle school education. He visited Peking, and while there, received his serious introduction to communist theory in Li Tachao's Marxist study group. Now, if he was to develop a reputation in socialist circles, he had to find a forum to propagate his views. At this crucial point, the Student Union of Yale and China invited Mao to take over the editorship of their journal. Mao accepted the position and changed the format of the student magazine. It would now deal with social criticism and current problems and focus on thought reorientation.
They concerned the build-up of the three types of socialism: Bolshevik socialism in Russia, what we might call welfare socialism in the United States, and Hitlerian or National Socialism. And each book examines the financing and the contributions made by Wall Street, by international bankers, to the development of that specific form of socialism.
You've got a group within the administration who are members, who are connected with the order. When you get a group of quite capable men working together, they can wear down opposition, they can erode opposition, because they're all kind of marching in step. If you get 3 men marching in step, they can do more than 20 men marching to their own step. Do I make my point here?
Mm-hmm. And there you have it. Now we're just at the beginning of this, but there you have it. There are secret societies. Skull and Bones is one of them. These groups at Oxford, we'll talk about in a little bit, are another. Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarship. Bill Clinton was at Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship. We'll talk about Cecil Rhodes in a second. What you're going to see is that this group of rich and powerful people connected to these secret societies and open societies of the elites, the people who meet at Davos, right? The secret ones are the Bilderberg meetings, which people know about now, but that are held in secret, right? We're going to talk about how these groups, the deep state is connected to these groups. The British intelligence agencies are connected to these groups. The U.S. intelligence agencies are connected to these groups. The birth of the CIA, when Harry Truman created the CIA in 1947, and its first role, its first job, the CIA's first job, was election interference in the Italian election. And the CIA was heavily influenced by British intelligence. I'm going to come back to that. We're going to cover everything tonight. It's going to get very deep, but completely provable. Go look up the relationship between James Angleton and Kim Philby, and you'll find that. Kim Philby was the British spy, it turned out, and Angleton was the big spy hunter in the CIA. Because Angleton was there at the founding of the CIA when it came out of the OSS, you'll see that Angleton is literally part of the elites. All these CIA people, the people who formed the CIA, all part of the elite classes, all went to Ivy League schools and stuff like that. Artists, many of them artists and writers and poets. Years after Anthony Sutton says what you just saw, this happens. This happens. Remember this?
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country. We can do a better job, and I intend to do it.
And we'll be watching. Be safe on the campaign trail. John Kerry, thanks for joining us. And we'll be right back.
Those motherfuckers wanted to change the conversation, didn't they? Right? Years after Anthony Sutton, don't forget, before Anthony Sutton put his book out on the order, before that came out, it was a rumored secret society. It had existed since the 1800s, but it was a rumored secret society. This is why they're terrified of you. This is why this right here, what we're doing, is what they're terrified. Because everything I'm showing you, if you sit there and start to look it up for yourself, you will go, oh my God, everything he's telling me is true. And this is why I say, download this, put this on a hard drive somewhere, nice and hidden, because the police state's not going to want you to have this, because they're not going to want anybody to figure out what's really going on in the world, because they manage conflict. This is what they do. They present false choices to you. They've been doing it forever. They've gotten very good at it. Do you understand? They've gotten very good at it. But they did not count on the fact that you would be able to take your phone and research everything, and now you're starting to see generations of people. It's these groups of people, a loose association of millionaires and billionaires, mostly billionaires, trillionaires, and monarchy, and oil companies and royalty behind all of this. Behind all of this. This is what you're seeing right now. The world you live in right now is controlled by people who are part of secret societies and groups that meet privately. That's the elites. And they run things more than the people you think you're electing. The people you're electing are puppets, right? That's what you're electing. You're electing puppets. You're electing people who are good spokesmen, and one will pretend to be over here, and the other will pretend to be over here, and you will go, oh, I like this one, and you'll go, well, I don't like that one, but I like this one, right? That's what's going on. In the meanwhile, you're being robbed blind. Because this is not it. you're not looking at who's, as Bill Hicks said, who controls both puppets. Do you understand? This is the world you live in. And it has created a web of propaganda devices, all of which are connected, that seem to be the media. And so when you look at the story now, that part of the reason I'm doing this is I told you we're going to get into today as well. Why doesn't the president know what's going on? Because President Trump stumbled into this hornet's nest of secret societies that are not, they don't see right or left, they're all part of the same thing.
And now they're faced with a very real prospect of Donald Trump becoming the leader of the party, and it absolutely drives them crazy. They just cannot imagine sharing. Well, because he's an outsider. He's not them. He's not part of the club. He's uncontrollable. You know, he hasn't been through the initiation rites. He didn't belong to the secret society.
Do you understand? Are you starting, is this starting to make some sense to you? That what you're seeing here is not about the 2016 election. It's not about Trump. It's about who controls the world. These elite, interconnected people in business, government, politics, not all of them, right? But there's a fairly tight group of people. And it's fairly vast, and they don't agree on everything, and there are some real conflicts and blah, 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 blah. And they screw each other's wives, and they're jealous, and they don't like someone's, the way their breath smells or whatever. They're people as well. So let's be realistic, right? Let's be realistic. They're human beings as well. And I always factor that in. But in fact, that being said, they're also part of these secret societies that really run things, and that's what you're looking at here. I've thought a lot about the way to explain this best to you. What I'm going to do is start by asking a question that you have an answer to somewhere in your mind. You have an impression of it, which is, what is the Clintons' relationship with Russia? And I'm going to ask that question again. What is the Clintons' relationship with Russia? This is what's really important for you to understand. And it's going to be the basis, it's going to be the thread that runs through the entire thing tonight. Because you're going to see that the answer to that question, which we're going to lay out in detail, will get us into a whole bunch of areas going back to the 1800s, going forward to the 2016 election, and today. This takes us in a lot of areas. Let's settle this once and for all. This is a factual case I'm about to make. It is not a flight of fancy. And the thing that the elites who rule the world are petrified about is they know that all the facts are still out there. They haven't taken down all the videos yet as I record this, February 10th, still 2019. They haven't removed everything yet. Yes, they took down my entire YouTube channel for, which I won't even get into, 10 years of videos, 1,000 videos. And they've taken Roger Stone's Twitter, and that's significant because they took it before he was indicted. And the indictment references, and other lawsuits against him reference his Twitter feed, which you now can't look into for yourself. Have you noticed that? Okay. Let's ask the question again. What is the Clintons' relationship with Russia? And I want you to see that that's a question that takes us to a lot of places. Okay? So doing the graphic things that I do sometimes, let's start here. This is a picture of Bill Clinton at Oxford. This is Strobe Talbott. Okay? So, this is another roommate of theirs who passed away, but these guys were flatmates, Bill Clinton and Strobe Talbott. This is important because Strobe Talbott is a prime figure in the 2016 election scandal. He was one of the people being briefed by Christopher Steele. Okay? So just hold that thought in your head for a second. But we're going back to Oxford, to the picture I just showed you, to Bill Clinton. Why are we going back there? because there are three periods that we're going to focus on when we talk about the fundamental question we're asking. What is the Clintons' relationship to Russia? Because the answer to that question, understanding the Clintons' real relationship to Russia, which is provable, is the key to this entire thing. It's exactly what they don't want you to know about. Now, this starts to get into the weeds, and it starts to get into areas with people with names like Kordakovsky and stuff like that that people don't know and are hard to say and hard to remember, and people who seem to be minor figures. But everybody's heard of Bill and Hillary Clinton, right? And that's why I want to use this as the thread. And actually, because they are central players here. Now, there's three time periods that are important here. Late 60s, early 70s, the 90s, when Clinton was president, and then we'll jump to the 2016 election. And what you're going to see is that there are players who fit into all of those periods. Strobe Talbott goes back to him at Oxford. And again, what is Clinton's relationship with Russia? That's what we're asking here. Strobe Talbott goes back with him to Oxford. Strobe Talbott, now this part go look up on your own. He was actually a Russian expert in Oxford. He's the one, the other guy you want to see, if we go back to Oxford, would be David Satter. David Satter writes for the National Review now. Okay? David Satter, like Bill Clinton, like Strobe Talbott, was a Vietnam protester, leftist, right? Today, David Satter writes for New Republic. That's who he is. Now, how does he figure in today? Does he? He does. David Satter, in 2016, is a friend of Bill Browder. We'll talk about him in a second. He's also part of PutinCon, which was sponsored by Kordakovsky. I haven't talked about who they are yet, so if those names lose you, don't worry about it, that's fine. But I want to point out that these people go back to Bill Clinton's days at Oxford. These are people who go back as far with Bill Clinton, basically, as you can rationally go, right? His formative years, right? Now, but they're still around. You're going to see these players are still key players in the 2016 election scandal. These players were key players during Bill Clinton's administration in the 90s. Okay? Strobe Talbott was part of the Bill Clinton administration in the 1990s. Okay? That, you know, we're going to talk about Jonathan Weiner later. Jonathan Weiner, part of the Bill Clinton administration. Let's do that here. Alexandra Chalupa. Was part of the Bill Clinton administration. Victoria Nuland was part of the Bill Clinton administration. She was the assistant to Strobe Talbott. Victoria Nuland is married to Robert Kagan. And if you look into her resume, she's worked for two people, Strobe Talbott and Dick Cheney. Now, Robert Kagan is like the king of the neocons. He's one of the founding, most important people in the neocon movement. We'll talk about neocons and neoliberals a lot tonight. But you're starting to see it right here. Victoria Nuland, Dick Cheney, and Strobe Talbott. So, Victoria Nuland is working with Strobe Talbott and Dick Cheney. What is that? Okay, so who cares? Why does that matter? But let's go back. Let's ask the question again. I told you the river that runs through this whole thing tonight is, what is the Clintons' relationship to Russia? Okay? So Bill Clinton, when he's at Oxford, he is tutor. He goes to Russia. And don't forget, Bill Clinton, Strobe Talbott, David Satter, showed you their picture before. Okay? That's Strobe Talbott in Oxford. That's Bill Clinton. Now, when Clinton goes to Russia, and again, these guys are anti-Vietnam activists on the left, right? That's beard hippie Clinton, right? Let's go parallel to Hillary Clinton's formative period, okay? Here's Hillary Clinton's senior thesis. Her senior thesis at Wellesley is an analysis of the Alinsky model. This is her 1969 senior thesis at Wellesley. It was about Saul Alinsky. Now, she would maintain a relationship with Saul Alinsky, who she interviewed for this thesis, pretty much as long as you could, I guess. This is real. This is absolutely confirmed. This is not fake. You do your own research if you want to. This is absolutely confirmed. Letter from Hillary Clinton to Saul Alinsky. The whole letter is available. You can read it and everything like that. At the time Hillary Clinton's in Berkeley, she's working at Truhaft Bernstein. I forget the name of the other one. It's important. I'm going to explain why this is important, because it's important to understanding the relationship of what's going on here. Yeah, Walker, Doris Walker, Truhaft Walker Bernstein. I always forget Walker. But anyway, there's hippie Hillary, right? It's so awesome, right? And these are the hardcore communists who she worked for. Now, let's pause here for a moment. Okay, so another key to understanding the political situation today. We have these secret societies and all that stuff we talked about. But you also have to understand that the methods of these societies, although it wouldn't seem like the radicals and the establishment, right, would get along, in fact, they do. And understanding how the Clintons and why the Clintons sold out, as so many people did, is key to understanding it. But again, I'm going to tell you, a lot of what you think you know is based on the fact that what I said before, you are living in a propaganda society where you're manipulated by the elite message and power every day. That's why there aren't investigative reports on any of this stuff. Every day you've been lied to. Your entire life you've been lied to. The situation we're in now is that the narratives about Bill and Hillary Clinton, you can find out the facts, but they've been strongly influenced by the two things you're looking at here. It's Hillary Clinton's radical communist nature and her friendship with Saul Alinsky. You've got two devils on her shoulder, Saul Alinsky and radical communism. And in a lot of ways, she and many of the other radicals who sold out chose both. Now, the importance of Alinsky is significant because Saul Alinsky is a guy who, again, this is not just somebody Hillary Clinton read. She was corresponding with him. They were friendly. She knows and understands Alinsky. And let me explain what I know and understand about Alinsky and his importance. Alinsky came at a time of radicalism in this country where groups like the hippies and the yippies and the Weather Underground, not the hippies were a group exactly, but the yippie movement was, Jerry Rubin, the yippie movement, that's a real specific movement, and so is the Weather Underground, and so is the Students for a Democratic Society, and it was all scruffy-looking college students. And those scruffy-looking college students hated Saul Alinsky. They agreed with him ideologically. They were all hard leftists. They were all very hard leftists. And they were being influenced at the time by philosophers, the French philosophers, and also the Frankfurt School. People like Herbert Marcuse, who was the mentor, but I want you to understand how deep this goes and what the real things are. This is Angela Davis and Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse was part of the Frankfurt School. This is a group of communists in Germany who communism wasn't catching on the way they thought it would. And the Frankfurt School created what has been come to have known as cultural Marxism. But essentially their view was that you weren't going to get communism necessarily through the classes uprising. That part hadn't worked out particularly well, so that you would use culture. You would take control of education. You would take control of the media. You would take control of art, right?
You are trying to conquer the world and make a new world order based on the model of collectivism through force and violence and bloodshed and quick revolution. That's the wrong way, they said. The proper way is patient gradualism. They said, let's follow the motto or the tactics of Quintus Fabius and delay so there's no confrontation and drag it out over a long period of time. And instead of confronting your enemy head on, we will infiltrate his institutions. We will move our people into his government agencies, into his educational institutions, and into his charitable organizations, into his corporations, and we'll gradually convert the world to international socialism.
And this is significant to understanding what's going on today. Angela Davis was a black radical. She was raised in middle-class upbringing, in upper middle-class upbringing in Mississippi. She went to Brandeis, which is where Marcuse was teaching. Marcuse was one of a couple of the people from the Frankfurt School who came over after World War II and were directly working with our government, by the way. Again, these are hardcore communists. And Marcuse is also was the philosopher of the left. I want you to understand there's a deep intellectual tradition here, which is how the elites work, because this stuff is spread through Ivy League. Don't forget who you got at the Ivy League. You've got the elites and you've got the radicals, but they've come together, and that's where Alinsky comes in. You have to understand this. Alinsky comes in because Alinsky said, oh, I agree with you hippies, but shave your frickin' beard, cut your damn hair, and put on a suit. You understand? That was Alinsky's message. Read Rules for Radicals. That's what he was telling people. You're not doing it right. And he also put up the rules for modern organizations. She's got the radicals, right? She's got the radicals, but she's got Alinsky. And where these two merged is exactly what we're seeing today, too. I talked before about these secret societies. Again, these Ivy League schools are full of elites and they're full of radicals. And they mated. Do you understand? The radicals cut their hair, most of them, or lots of them, if they stayed in politics, lots of them, they cut their hair, they shaved their damn beards. They stayed radicals, but they followed Saul Alinsky's advice. Now, they figured out how to get power. They figured out how to get power. So what happened with the Clintons? The Clintons figured out how the world works. The Clintons figured out a lot of the stuff that I'm going to show to you. And they figured it out because they were dealing with people like Alinsky, who saw that you can bring radicalism and organization. And the elites took note of what Alinsky was doing with the unions in Chicago. Back of the yards, the movement he started there. And the elites, which already had their own power structures in place, especially after World War I, which the elites dragged the world into. That was a setup. James Corbett has a great film on that. I'm just going to mention this to you. Watch this. Watch this video. The World War I conspiracy. Very good. 30 minutes. You see, this World War I stuff is very important because when you look into it, it was started by the people like Cecil Rhodes. Remember I mentioned him before? The Rhodes Scholarship was named after him, and he's the one who colonized Africa, South Africa specifically, and started the De Beers Diamond Company. He is where a lot of this stuff came from.
London in the winter of 1891. There, three of the most important men of the age, men whose names are but dimly remembered today, are taking the first concrete steps toward forming a secret society that they have been discussing amongst themselves for years. The group that springs from this meeting will go on to leverage the wealth and power of its members to shape the course of history, and, 23 years later, will drive the world into the first truly global war. Their plan reads like outlandish historical fiction. They will form a secret organization dedicated to the extension of British rule throughout the world and the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of a British empire. The group is to be structured along the lines of a religious brotherhood. The Jesuit order is repeatedly invoked as a model, divided into two circles. An inner circle, called the Society of the Elect, who are to direct the activity of the larger outer circle, dubbed the Association of Helpers, who are not to know of the inner circle's existence. British rule and inner circles and secret societies. If presented with this plan today, many would say it was the work of an imaginative comic book writer. But the three men who gathered in London that winter afternoon in 1891 were no mere comic book writers. They were among the wealthiest and most influential men in British society, and they had access to the resources and the contacts to make that dream into a reality. Present at the meeting that day, William T. Stead, famed newspaper editor whose Pall Mall Gazette broke ground as a pioneer of tabloid journalism, and whose Review of Reviews was enormously influential throughout the English-speaking world. Reginald Brett, later known as Lord Esher, an historian and politician who became friend, confidant, and advisor to Queen Victoria, King Edward VII, and King George V, and who was known as one of the primary powers behind the throne of his era. And Cecil Rhodes, the enormously wealthy diamond magnate whose exploits in South Africa and ambition to transform the African continent would earn him the nickname of Colossus by the satirists of the day. But Rhodes's ambition was no laughing matter. If anyone in the world had the power and ability to form such a group at the time, it was Cecil Rhodes. Richard Grove, historical researcher and author, tragedyandhope.com.
Cecil Rhodes also was from Britain. He was educated at Oxford, but he only went to Oxford after he went to South Africa. He had an older brother. He follows him to South Africa. The older brother was working in the diamond mines, and by the time Rhodes gets there, he's got a setup, and his brother says, I'm going to go off and dig in the gold mines. They just found gold. And so he leaves Cecil Rhodes, his younger brother, who's like in his 20s, with this whole diamond mining operation. Rhodes then goes to Oxford, comes back down to South Africa with the help of Lord Rothschild, who had funding efforts behind De Beers and taking advantage of that situation. And from there, they start to use there's no other term than slave labor, which then turns in later to the apartheid policy of South Africa.
Well, Rhodes was particularly important because in many ways, at the end of the 19th century, he seriously epitomized where capitalism was, where wealth really lay.
Jerry Docherty, World War I scholar and co-author of Hidden History, The Secret Origins of the First World War.
Rhodes had the money and he had the contact. He was a great Rothschild man, and his mining wealth was literally uncountable. He wanted to associate himself with Oxford because Oxford gave him the kudos of the university of knowledge, of that kind of power. And in fact, that was centered in a very secretive place called All Souls College. Still, you'll find many references to All Souls College and people behind the curtain and such phrases, power behind thrones. Rhodes was centrally important in actually putting money up in order to begin to gather together like-minded people of great influence.
Rhodes was not shy about his ambitions, and his intention to form such a group were known to many. Throughout his short life, Rhodes discussed his intentions openly with many of his associates who, unsurprisingly, happened to be among the most influential figures in British society at that time. More remarkably, this secret society, which was to wield its power behind the throne, was not a secret at all. The New York Times even published an article discussing the founding of the group in the April 9, 1902 edition of the paper, shortly after Rhodes's death. The article, headlined Mr. Rhodes's Ideal of Anglo-Saxon Greatness, and carrying the remarkable subhead, he believed a wealthy secret society should work to secure the world's peace and a British-American federation, summarized this sensational plan by noting that Rhodes's idea for the development of the English-speaking race was the foundation of a society copied, as to organization, from the Jesuits. Noting that his vision involved uniting the United States Assembly and our House of Commons to achieve the peace of the world, the article quotes Rhodes as saying, "The only thing feasible to carry out this idea is a secret society gradually absorbing the wealth of the world." This idea is laid down in black and white in a series of wills that Rhodes wrote throughout his life. Wills that not only laid out his plan to create such a society and provided the funds to do so, but, even more remarkably, were collected in a volume published after his death by co-conspirator William T. Stead.
Rhodes also left his great deal of money, not having any children, not having married, dying at a young age, left it in a very well-known last will and testament, of which there were several different editions, naming different benefactors, naming different executors. So in 1902, Cecil Rhodes dies. There's a book published. It contains his last will and testament. The guy who wrote the book, William T. Stead, was in charge of a British publication called the Review of the Reviews. He was part of Rhodes's roundtable group. He at one time was an executor for the will. And in that will, it says that he laments the loss of America from the British Empire and that they should formulate a secret society with the specific aim of bringing America back into the empire. Then he names all the countries that they need to include in this list to have world domination, to have an English-speaking union, to have British race as the enforced culture on all countries around the world. The will contains the goal. The goal is amended over a series of years and supported and used to gain support. And then by the time he dies in 1902, there's funding, there's a plan, there's an agenda, there's working groups, and it all launches and then takes hold. And then not too long later, you've got World War I. And then from that, you've got World War II. And then you've got a century of control and slavery that really could have been prevented.
Why is Lee talking about Cecil Rhodes? Why am I saying, now here's what it is. Do you know who knows all of this? Bill Clinton does.
And then as a student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carroll Quigley.
That's Bill Clinton talking about Carroll Quigley. Who's Carroll Quigley? Carroll Quigley was a professor at Georgetown for a long time. And he wrote a few books that exposed this secret order.
Is a 1966 textbook authored by Georgetown professor Dr. Carroll Quigley, titled Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. In it, Quigley details a secret society, partially funded by central banker Lord Rothschild, enacted by Cecil Rhodes and led by Lord Alfred Milner and the Round Table Journal of International Affairs, which Quigley terms the Milner Group. The first questions most people ask upon hearing of such a book are, why is it so important? And why do so few know about its existence?
This is a key book. It's almost like the Rosetta Stone to decode everything they're doing. It's over 1,000 pages long with incredible, documentation in the bibliography of how this ruling elite based out of Britain is using a full spectrum dominance model to fund the communists, to fund the fascists, to fund the Democrats, to fund the Republicans, so that there looks like there's a choice, but everything really is moving towards collectivism for the general public, while the elite themselves are exempt from all their own rules.
These are the ideas of people who plunder that care not about laws or boundaries or nations or your rights. They see might makes right. And so when Cecil Rhodes goes in and creates Rhodesia, and you have South Africa and the De Beers whole cartel of diamonds and gold, and then you look at who Cecil Rhodes left his will to, who funded him to go down there and do that, you keep coming back to the historical central bankers that have been manipulating world events as we've been taught them for at least, since the beginning of our country. 1776, 1790 is when they start to gain a foothold. They then come over in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, pre-Civil War, gain a stronger foothold. And by the end of the Civil War, we're completely switched over to a system that we had fought 60 years before to overthrow.
Once the power structure got all the best and brightest students of the world and put them through Rhodes Scholar type programs, not just in England, but in other nations, they could then control the brain trust and have a fully programmed new generation to take control of the governmental corporate and media systems to carry out the program.
Their goal was to dominate all of those major power centers quietly behind the scenes. And by moving the leadership in a certain direction, then they knew that they could control the masses without the masses even knowing that they're being dominated and led by a very small, powerful elite group.
In further pursuit of the science of controlling human resources, the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes spawned the Pilgrim Society in both America and England, which created a global brain trust.
Its roots go way, way back in history, and they go back to the formation of a secret society, a secret organization that was created by Cecil Rhodes, very powerful and very wealthy individual. And people have heard about him in history, and they know about the Rhodes Scholarship, and they think, well, isn't that nice? They don't understand at all what that's all about. Cecil Rhodes, when he died, left his great fortune not to his family, not to his heirs, but for the creation of a secret society. And we know about this because there were some people very intimately involved with this organization who wrote about it. One of the best authors on this topic is Professor Carroll Quigley. He wrote several books, and Tragedy and Hope is the best known of his. He described in detail the secret organization created by Cecil Rhodes, and he explains in these books he knows about them because he was invited by the organization into its inner circle. He was never a member of it, but he was invited in as their historian, and he was allowed to see their secret records and papers and study them for several years. And he knew all the important players, and he understood what it was about, and so he wrote these books. It's an amazing thing because he laid out in great detail what the purpose of the organization was and how they were the major players in all of the big international events since and including World War I. The bottom line is that you take the roots of that organization and you find out that they created in all of the British dependencies what they call roundtable groups. And then around those little roundtable groups, they created front groups. And the purpose of these front groups and roundtable groups was to penetrate into the governments of all of these different countries, to penetrate into the media centers, to penetrate into the educational systems. In other words, to penetrate into the social fabric, the power centers of society, and literally take them over from the inside without anybody being aware that they were controlling influence.
The group that I'm writing about was originally, in my mind, the group established secretly by Lord Milner in 1908 and 1999 called the Round Table Group, which still publishes a quarterly magazine called The Round Table in London, which is one of the world's best sources of international relations information since 1910.
He also wrote a book on the Anglo-American establishment. I'm going to submit to you at this point that Bill Clinton knows the history because he's dealing with these people, and because Quigley did become, and this is, Bill Clinton was studying him at a point when this stuff was starting to come out, okay, that Bill Clinton knows and understands this better than almost anybody in the world, that what Quigley was talking about. And you heard that he just name dropped him when he's getting the presidency, okay? So when he's getting the nomination to be the president in 1992, he mentions Carroll Quigley. Most people don't know who Carroll Quigley is. Alex Jones does. Tragedy and Hope. You can find both these books online. A History of the World in Our Time.
Ruskin's message had a sensational impact. His inaugural lecture was copied out in longhand by one undergraduate, Cecil Rhodes, who kept it with him for 30 years. Rhodes, 1853 to 1902, feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa, rose to be Prime Minister of the Cape Colony 1890 to 1896, contributed money to political parties, controlled parliamentary seats both in England and in South Africa, and sought to win a strip of British territory across Africa from the Cape of Good Hope to Egypt, and to join these two extremes together with a telegraph line and ultimately with a Cape to Cairo railway. Rhodes inspired devoted support for his goals from others in South Africa and in England. With financial support from Lord Rothschild and Alfred Beit, he was able to monopolize the diamond mines of South Africa as De Beers Consolidated Mines, and to build up a great gold mining enterprise as Consolidated Goldfields. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of at least £1 million sterling a year, then about $5 million, which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes that he was usually overdrawn on his account. These purposes centered on his desire to federate the English-speaking peoples and to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford, in order to spread the English ruling class tradition throughout the English-speaking world, as Ruskin had wanted. Among Ruskin's most devoted disciples at Oxford were a group of intimate friends, including Arnold Toynbee, Alfred, later Lord Milner, Arthur Glazebrook, George, later Sir George Parkin, Philip Langton Gell, and Henry, later Sir Henry Birchenough. These were so moved by Ruskin that they devoted the rest of their lives to carrying out his ideas. A similar group of Cambridge men, including Reginald Balliol Brett, Lord Esher, Sir John B. Seeley, Albert Lord Grey, and Edmund Garrett, were also aroused by Ruskin's message and devoted their lives to extension of the British Empire and uplift of England's urban masses as two parts of one project, which they called Extension of the English-Speaking Idea. They were remarkably successful in these aims, because England's most sensational journalist, William T. Stead, 1849 to 1912, an ardent social reformer and imperialist, brought them into association with Rhodes. This association was formally established on February 5, 1891, when Rhodes and Stead organized a secret society, of which Rhodes had been dreaming for 16 years. In this secret society, Rhodes was to be leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee. Arthur Lord Balfour, Sir Henry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers, later organized by Milner as the Round Table Organization. Brett was invited to join this organization the same day, and Milner a couple of weeks later, on his return from Egypt. Both accepted with enthusiasm. Thus, the central part of the secret society was established by March 1891. It continued to function as a formal group, although the outer circle was apparently not organized until 1909 to 1913. As Governor-General and High Commissioner of South Africa in the period 1897 to 1905, Milner recruited a group of young men, chiefly from Oxford and from Toynbee Hall, to assist him in organizing his administration. Through his influence, these men were able to win influential posts in government and international finance, and became the dominant influence in British imperial and foreign affairs up to 1939. Under Milner, in South Africa, they were known as Milner's Kindergarten until 1910. In 1909 to 1913, they organized semi-secret groups known as Round Table Groups in the chief British dependencies and the United States. These still function in 8 countries. They kept in touch with each other by personal correspondence and frequent visits, and through an influential quarterly magazine, The Round Table. Founded in 1910 and largely supported by Sir Abe Bailey's money. In 1919, they founded the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, for which the chief financial supporters were Sir Abe Bailey and the Astor family, owners of the Times. Similar institutes of international affairs were established in the chief British dominions and in the United States, where it is known as the Council on Foreign Relations.
The stuff that I've hinted at a little bit earlier in this. Cecil Rhodes, Milner's Kindergarten. These are things you can look up that he talks about. Let's talk about history real quickly, okay? The United States broke away, as a colony, broke away from monarchy and empire. Do you understand? The United States broke away from monarchy and empire. We did it in the late 1700s, 1776 and all that, in 1783. Then, the War of 1812, the Brits still weren't happy. The British, who are now our allies, and by the way, you see the Brits all over the 2016 election scandal, from Christopher Steele to the obvious role of British intelligence in it, all of that. This goes back to stuff that I was saying earlier about Angleton, Philby, and so on and so forth. It's not an accident. It's not an accident. And you can follow the Clintons' careers, and you can find stuff like Quigley's book here on the Anglo-American establishment. If I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, then so is Carroll Quigley. Because I'm not. Because Quigley lays this out in factual detail what was going on.
Now, I discovered he kept it because he went immediately to South Africa and met the kindergarten, which was the group of people that were running South Africa for Lord Milner, you see. They were called kindergarten because they were all young kids, you see. Now, these are the ones who remained forever after, fellows of all sorts, or in Lionel Curtis's case, he's the man who said, we've got to change the name from British Empire to Commonwealth of Nations. And the reason is they had been students of Alfred Zimmermann, who wrote a book in 1909 called The Greek Commonwealth, describing ancient Greece, you see, and who was the man who made Arnold Toynbee a great classical scholar, do you see, and brought him into international affairs. Now, I knew none of this. All I knew is that here was a fellow, Lionel Curtis, who was such a poor student, it took him 15 years to get his degree, and then he got it about the lowest pass degree or something that you could ever get. And nobody knew it. Nobody had ever heard of him.
Right. But he was
furthermore,
company.
I later discovered, furthermore, he was Lord Halifax's roommate at All Souls for years. And then I discovered this fella is behind everything that's going on. Lionel Curtis, do you see? Now, I don't think we should talk too much about this.
Well, no, I
do see. All right. All right. But having discovered that, I met Alfred Zimmermann. He came here to give a speech. And I said, isn't it funny that All Souls, he said, that's the Round Table Group. I had never heard of them. That shows how little I knew. And they've been around since 1909 and published this magazine since 1910, and this is 1947. And I said, what is the Round Table Group? He named them, who they were. And he says, I was a member of them for 10 years, from 1913, and they brought me in, invited me because I was in the Workers' Education Alliance. This was extension programs, night courses, summer courses for workers, Workers' Education Alliance. And he said, that's why they brought me into it, and I was for 10 years, and he says, I resigned in 1923 because they were determined to build up Germany against France. He says, I wouldn't stand for it, so I resigned. Now, when I met Lord Brand later and asked him about this, he had never seen the letter of resignation. Now, so I better stop talking because, you see, this gets into all kinds of things. Now, this is, I knew the Round Table Group was very influential. I knew that they were the real founders of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and I knew they were all the stuff that's in print, that they were the real founders of the Institute of Pacific Relations. I knew that they were the godfathers of the Council on Foreign Relations here. I knew that, for example, you know the big study of history, many volumes of Arnold Toynbee? All right. I knew the manuscripts of that were stored in the Council on Foreign Relations during the war so they wouldn't be destroyed by German bombing, do you see? And so forth. And so forth. So I began to put these things together and discovered that this group was working for the following things. They were a secret group. They were working to federate the English-speaking world, the English-speaking world. They were closely linked to international bankers. They were working to establish a world, what I call a three-power world. And that three-power world was the Atlantic bloc of England and the Commonwealth and the United States, Germany, Hitler's Germany, Soviet Russia, the three-power world.
None of this is conjecture. None of this is conjecture.
The power and influence of this Rhodes-Milner group in British imperial affairs and in foreign policy since 1889, although not widely recognized, can hardly be exaggerated. We might mention as an example that this group dominated the Times from 1890 to 1912 and has controlled it completely since 1912, except for the years 1919 to 1922. Because the Times has been owned by the Astor family since 1922, This Rhodes-Milner group was sometimes spoken of as the Cliveden Set, named after the Astor country house, where they sometimes assembled. Numerous other papers and journals have been under the control or influence of this group since 1889. They have also established and influenced numerous university and other chairs of imperial affairs and international relations. Some of these are the Beit chairs at Oxford, the Montague Burton chair at Oxford, the Rhodes chair at London, the Stevenson chair at Chatham House, the Wilson chair at Aberystwyth, and others, as well as such important sources of influence as Rhodes House at Oxford. From 1884 to about 1915, the members of this group worked valiantly to extend the British Empire and to organize it in a federal system. They were constantly harping on the lessons to be learned from the failure of the American Revolution and the success of the Canadian Federation of 1867, and hoped to federate the various parts of the empire as seemed feasible, then confederate the whole of it with the United Kingdom into a single organization. They also hoped to bring the United States into this organization to whatever degree was possible. Stead was able to get Rhodes to accept, in principle, a solution which might have made Washington the capital of the whole organization, or allow parts of the empire to become states of the American Union.
If you look at a lot of what's going on in the 2016 election, you'll see the Atlantic Council runs all the way through to it. And the Atlantic Council, if you look into them, are a function of NATO, which believes in Atlanticism, which is exactly the same philosophy that Cecil Rhodes, creator of the Rhodes Scholarship, Rhodesia is named after him, set up the De Beers Diamond Company, helped the British establish empire, and in his wills talked about secret society. It is not an accident or coincidence that this same philosophy of Atlanticism is the underlying thing behind the Atlantic Council. This underlying thing of Atlanticism is the power elite that runs the world right now. That's who runs the world, provably connected to secret societies that were formed in the 1800s. By the way, this is around the same time Skull and Bones was formed in the U.S., too. Right around that same time period, the 1800s. It goes back a long way, right? So here's what I'm saying. Bill Clinton sees this, sees what Quigley's talking about, and decides that's what I'm going to do. And together with Hillary Clinton, with the Alinsky influence of keep your radicalism, but cut your hair, put on a suit, play within the system, this sums up the political system that we have in this country today. It's been run by dynasties connected to secret societies, the Bushes and the Clintons. Not everyone's in the secret society. Clinton himself is not a member of Skull and Bones, right? He was introduced to the world for the Council of Foreign Relations, which was formed after World War I, right after World War I, which we were dragged into by these secret societies. Boom, boom. Okay. Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. The Royal Institute of International Affairs was created after World War I, after the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? The American equivalent was formed a year or two later, called the Council on Foreign Relations. You're looking at their actual website, not a conspiracy theorist site. Chatham House rules are applied at the Bilderberg meetings. What are Chatham House rules?
The Council on Foreign Relations is well known among researchers of parapolitics as one of the organizations of interest directing Washington's foreign policy. Once derided as conspiracy theory, the influence of the group is now a truism that is openly joked about in Washington's foreign policy circles.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the Council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
What many do not know, however, is that the CFR is in fact a branch of a slightly older, slightly less known organization, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Born from the ashes of war-ravaged Europe following the Great War, the idea for the RIIA was forged at an informal session during the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. The institute was formalized the next year, first as the British Institute of International Affairs, and then, after receiving its royal charter, as the Royal Institute of International Affairs. The group became synonymous with Chatham House, its headquarters in St. James's Square in London, and is widely recognized among foreign policy experts as the most influential think tank in the world.
In a world of growing interdependence, the need for rigorous and independent analysis has never been greater. This is true first in the area of international economics, where the global financial crisis and the rise of the G20 are completely changing the international context. Second, we have competition for resources, for oil, for gas, but also for food and water, and how this is interacting with changing climates. Then third, there's the changing balance between the established powers and the rising powers, and what this means for security. Chatham House works across these three areas, in international economics, in energy, environment and resource governance, and in regional and security studies. We publish reports, we publish papers, we hold discussions and conferences, and we discuss our ideas with policymakers from around the world.
In the years since its inception, the RIIA has opened branches in countries across the British Commonwealth and around the world, including the Council on Foreign Relations, born largely from the same 1919 Paris meeting that birthed the Institute itself, the Australian Institute of International Affairs, the South African Institute of International Affairs, the Pakistan Institute of International Affairs, the Canadian International Council, and similar organizations. Officially, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, like its various branch organizations, is a non-profit, non-governmental think tank that promotes analysis of international issues and world affairs in four main research areas: energy, environment and resources, international economics, international security, and area studies and international law. Also like its branch organizations, the majority of the group's publications and proceedings are open to the public and freely available via their website or their journal, International Affairs. Funded by partners, patrons, and corporate members that read like a who's who of the Fortune 500, including Chevron, AIG, Bloomberg, Toshiba, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Lockheed Martin, Royal Dutch Shell, the European Commission, and dozens of other corporations, institutions, and foreign governments, Chatham House consistently attracts some of the best-known speakers on a wide range of topics, releasing reports that set the global policy agenda, not only for Britain, but for much of the rest of the developed world as well.
We have further challenging issues to address between now and 2015, including how to take account of countries' common but differentiated responsibilities for tackling climate change, by moving towards a spectrum of commitments that reflects the economic realities of the 21st century. The current binary divide between developing and developed countries was defined in 1990, and I believe it's time to move on from it.
Militaries around the world aspire to our standards and the ability of our forces to work together. Importantly, we can integrate other nations' contributions into complex multinational operations like no other organization.
It was from that the Council on Foreign Relations sprang in this country. There were similar organizations in other British dependencies, and they all had as their goal the creation of a unified world government based on the model of collectivism. So there was this milieu of political and intellectual movement starting over 100 years ago. But it certainly has gained momentum through World War I, really got up to speed, and then finally in World War II, all of the major players on the world scene were talking about world government. They tried to do the League of Nations, that failed. Finally, they created the United Nations, that stuck. And so now they're just trying to pump up the United Nations into the framework of the
global government that they have always envisioned. And this has been a thing that goes beyond one generation. It's transgenerational. In other words, it's not just one person's vision. The people that started it are long gone, but those who inherited it continue this dream. To them, I'm sure they look at it as a wonderful thing. They see it as an end of nationhood, as it has been historically defined. They see that as advantageous, they say, because it'll put an end to war and so forth. And they can sell the idea as a great step toward brotherhood and a unified globe and so forth. They use all of these things to make it sound good. But when you start examining the actual policies that they're instituting, it's not so hot. It's based on the principle of collectivism, as I've said several times, and that means it's all-powerful government. It's a tyrannical government. It's the same kind of a system that Adolf Hitler had in mind, and we fought a war to destroy him and his system. The same kind of a system that Joseph Stalin had in mind, and we fought a Cold War and did a lot of other things to make sure that that didn't happen. The same kind of a system that Mao Zedong had in mind, and Benito Mussolini, all of the great collectivists of history have had this unified global government based on the model of collectivism as their goal, and we fought against it until recently. Now we are actually the greatest advocates of it ourselves. We don't call it tyranny, we don't call it fascism or Nazism or communism. We have a better name for it. The name they have chosen is the New World Order. That's their favorite phrase for it. But when you examine its nature and its essence, it is a collectivist system, powerful government, little people at the bottom taking orders. So this is the concept. It's been under evolution for over 100 years. It looks like it's coming within sight now. We've seen the nations of Europe amalgamate into the European Union. The sovereignty of all of the European nations has been pretty well lost now to the European Union, and they've always said that was a stepping stone toward the creation of a true world government, is to unite the smaller governments of the world first into regional groupings, such as the European Union. They have one in mind for Asia and Africa, and now they're talking about doing the same on the North American continent, called the North American Union, and it'll be a merger of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. A process that they deny that is underway, but it is definitely underway, and it's been underway for over a decade. And if you examine some of the laws and administrative rulings that are coming out of the federal government at all levels, they often use the word harmonization, meaning they're going to harmonize or attempting to harmonizing our laws with the laws of Canada and Mexico. So this process is well underway. We have seen the euro, a replacement of national currencies in Europe, a single regional currency. Now they're talking about the same thing here in the United States. To get rid of the US dollar, get rid of the Mexican peso and the Canadian dollar, and create a new currency for the three. They'll probably call it the Amero. That's the name they seem to be favoring at the moment. Step by step, this structure of world government based on the model of collectivism is being erected. Every day you can look in your newspaper and see evidence of another brick that's been put in place, another timber has been put in place. It's going on and on. So is this a good process or a bad process? Is it an inevitable process? Well, first of all, I don't think it's inevitable because it has to be done by people, and people have to want to do it or not want to do it. It's well advanced because the people that are in charge, the people we elect, the people who are running our own government, the people who are running the governments of these other nations, at the top, these people are all for it. So that's why it's happening. At the voter level, I don't think most people even know that it's happening. And if they did know, they'd probably say, I don't think this is a good idea. So the trick has always been how to make this happen without getting the American people or the people in Britain or France or Germany or Mexico or Canada too much alarmed about it before it's too late. That has always been the strategy that they have followed. So that means they have to deny that it's happening. It means they have to do it behind closed doors. That means they don't bring it up for a vote in Congress. They do it administratively. rather than legislatively. And all of those strategies and tactics are being used. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? In my view, it's a very bad thing, because I think collectivism is the graveyard of civilization. It's certainly the graveyard of freedom. If you just think about it, no collectivist system in the world has ever been the kind of a place where freedom was prosperous. People always wound up in the gulag or some kind of a concentration camp if they disagreed with their leaders. All of these factors, I think, need to be understood in order for us to come up with an intelligent plan of what to do about it. Because all of this is, academic unless we come up with a plan of what to do about it. And the first step in knowing what to do about it is knowing what not to do about it. And by that I mean what not to do about it is to fall for this left-right paradigm where both the right wing and the left wing are both pursuing this objective but fighting each other. And if we get caught up in that trap, we'll spend all of our time fighting the leftists or fighting the rightists, and it doesn't make any difference, because no matter which side you're on in that battle, you still are promoting this globalist government strategy. So the first thing to know is don't get trapped in this left-right paradigm.
Again, not conspiracy theory. It's all right out in the open. The rule originated at Chatham House with the aim of encouraging openness of discussion and facilitating sharing of information. The Chatham House rule reads as follows. When a meeting or part thereof is held under Chatham House rule, participants are free to use the information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speaker, nor that of any other participant, may be revealed. This is from their own flippin' website. This is the rule of these secret societies. You can use it if you're in the room. By the way, you're not going to get in that room. Do you understand? There's a small group of people, a few hundred people who get in those rooms. You ain't one of them. You're not one of them. When the Bilderberg meetings happen every year, again, that used to be a conspiracy theory. Now people go, oh, gee, I guess we're admitting it. The Chatham House rule is in effect. In full effect. Yo diggity. It is. Not sure on that? Again, they're petrified that you're going to figure this all out. I go into this, but I remind you, the central question we're asking is, what is the Clintons' relationship to Russia? Now, we showed you that through Oxford and everything like that, Bill Clinton is roommates with Strobe Talbott and friends with Strobe Talbott's one-time roommate, David Satter. By the way, Strobe Talbott on the left, David Satter now writes for National Review, right? That's who he writes for. Once again, it's that, here's the left, here's the right, here's the two puppets. Do you understand? You see this over and over with these people. Once you see it, you can't not see it. You can't unsee it. Once you see it, you see it's not a coincidence that these people, it's not a coincidence that Victoria Nuland worked for Strobe Talbott and Dick Cheney. They're on the same frickin' team. Do you understand? These are the people who really run things. The illusion is that they're different. I'll say that again. The illusion is that they're different. The reality is that they are on the same team. Does that make sense? The reason I'm going into all this background and trying to show you that it's not a coincidence that the Clintons came out of this, with the background of radical communism, with Hillary Clinton's, working at True Half Walker and Bernstein, working for Alex Raxley, then her friendship with Alinsky, you can see the difference, right? You can see what happened. They figured out how the system works and they bought into it.
I'm not sure whether you know it or not, but not everyone is convinced that man is capable of being free. George Bernard Shaw, in the second act of Man and Superman, wrote a rather remarkable line. He said, "Liberty means responsibility. That's why most men dread it." Shaw himself was among those people completely convinced that the human of the species lacks the responsibility to be free. And perhaps it was because of this that in the year of 1883, he joined with a group of intellectuals in London in a series of meetings that are consequential to our very times. They'd become somewhat intrigued by the ideas of a man named Karl Marx, who held that the state had to do the planning for all the component members thereof. Now, while this group of intellectuals agreed with Marx on basic economic theory, they had one very serious disagreement with him, and that was over the method of implementation of the idea that we know today as socialism. Marx, you may recall, preached the doctrine of revolution. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. To the group of British intellectuals, the idea of revolution seemed wasteful of human resources. And so these people sought a subtler method through which they might implement socialism. During the course of one of their meetings, as they discussed this need for a subtle technique, one of their members told the group a story out of ancient history, and perhaps you remember this from your high school studies. The story of the Second Punic War, and specifically the challenge to the Roman Empire by the Carthaginians under the leadership of Hannibal. Remember Hannibal? He revolutionized warfare by coming across the Alps with elephants as his chief armament. And now he stood on the very plains north of Rome, threatening the heart of the Roman Empire. Rome was under the control, under the leadership of a man named Maximus Quintus Fabius. And one thing that might be said for Fabius, he was intelligent enough not to fight Hannibal on Hannibal's terms and on Hannibal's battleground. He recognized that if he led the Roman legions out onto the plains north of Rome and engaged Hannibal in a frontal attack, he'd probably be defeated. And so Fabius worked out a method of warfare revolutionary for his times. Rejecting the idea of frontal attack, he chose instead to fight Hannibal through indirection, gradualism, bits and pieces. And utilizing this method, he gave additional centuries to the Roman Empire. Now, as this group of British intellectuals told themselves this story, they excitedly saw the prospect of applying the Fabian method to their specific problem. And before this evening was over, they had formally organized themselves as the Fabian Society of London and agreed on the Fabian tactic as the method they would use.
The Fabians selected him as their symbol or the symbolic name on purpose. They objected to the Leninists, not on the basis of their goals of collectivism, because they agreed with that. They were saying to the Leninists, you people are stupid, you're going about it in the wrong way. You are trying to conquer the world and make a new world order based on the model of collectivism through force and violence and bloodshed and quick revolution. That's the wrong way, they said. The proper way is patient gradualism. They said, let's follow the motto or the tactics of Quintus Fabius and delay so there's no confrontation and drag it out over a long period of time. And instead of confronting your enemy head on, we will infiltrate his institutions. We will move our people into his government agencies, into his educational institutions, and into his charitable organizations, into his corporations, and we'll gradually convert the world to international socialism in that fashion. The Fabians work quietly and behind the scenes. You don't hear about them. Not all of the people that practice Fabianism are members of the Fabian Society. I mean, Tony Blair, right now, who's the head of the British government, he's a member of the Fabian Society. But most of the Fabians in the world are not actual dues-paying members, but they follow the strategy of Fabianism nevertheless. And that is the philosophy that dominates the United States of America. Now, who are the Fabians? Well, when they were formed, of course, there were such well-known people as Arnold Toynbee, the famous historian, H.G. Wells, let's see, there was George Bernard Shaw, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, who were founders of the London School of Economics.
One of the most prominent individuals in the Fabian Socialist Society is a world-famous playwright, which you may have heard of, and certainly by the time you finish your education you will have heard of, named George Bernard Shaw.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world. I don't want to punish anybody, but there are an extraordinary number of people whom I want to kill.
George Bernard Shaw made the statement, and I'm quoting here, as a founder of the Fabian Socialist Society, I am basically a Marxist communist. Now, I would say that's being pretty blunt about it.
Part of the left went to Hitler, at least in France. Part of the socialists went to became advocates of Hitler.
The popular British playwright Bernard Shaw supported Hitler in the mass media. The left supported Hitler not because he deceived them. They knew Hitler would kill. He said he would. In fact, it was why they supported him.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social vote, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use to yourself.
Bernard Shaw believed in mass killing by category, not usually by racial category, but by category, you know, the idle, the unfit.
Killing off the parasites within society was what Marxian socialism was about.
It demanded in a London newspaper that the scientists should devise a humane gas.
I appeal to the chemists to discover a humane gas that will kill instantly and painlessly. Deadly by all means, but humane, not cruel. After 10 years, such gas will be discovered. It will be called Zyklon B. The man who oversaw its practical application, Adolf Eichmann, will later testify that thanks to Zyklon B, people in Auschwitz died without pain. Zyklon B was a humane gas. Yes, Eichmann will use the very same words. It must be said, though, that Bernard Shaw, as well as the left in general, fundamentally opposed Nazism, because Hitler had distorted Marxism beyond recognition. Gassing people based on their nationality was absolutely inexcusable. The selection should be based on class. Hitler got it all wrong. Absolutely different people needed to be killed.
The mural that appears in the Fabian Socialist headquarters in England, and it has a flag back here. It says FS for Fabian Socialism, and carrying the flag is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, if that's not telling you what they're up to, a wolf in sheep's clothing, I don't know what is. Another very famous member of this Fabian Socialist Society was H.G. Wells. You may remember H.G. Wells, very famous historian, also wrote a lot of, I guess maybe he was one of the first science fiction writers. He wrote a book called The War of the Worlds, which was quite famous. But he was a devoted Fabian socialist, and he wrote a book called The Open Conspiracy. in which he talks about the fact that what they are doing is they're changing socialism from a revolution into a method of takeover by the use of bureaucracy. The Fabian idea was, look, first thing we're going to do is we'll get our men in as the key professors at the leading universities. Now, all the most talented of the young people go to these universities, and what we'll do is in the classroom, we will convince them that socialism is the one and only true answer to all of men's problems.
In his 1928 book, The Open Conspiracy, former British psychological warfare expert H.G. Wells wrote, "The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The character of the open conspiracy will then be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion. This large, loose, assimilatory mass of groups and societies will definitely and obviously attempt to swallow up the entire population of the world and become a new human community. The immediate task before all people, a planned world state, is appearing as 1,000 points of light, but generations of propaganda and education may have to precede it."
And 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
The government of England put massive funding towards the study of humans, and not just medicine, but human behavior. And so all the sciences that the British Empire used on countries that it was attacking and regions it was conquering were also turned inward against their own populations.
The Fabians operate in this country through a number of organizations like what started out as the Intercollegiate Socialist Society, which later changed its name because of the word socialist, that operates through the ACLU and dozens of other fronts, all financed by foundations, primarily the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Carnegie Foundation. Now here we have the insider, super rich capitalists provide the money in this country for the Fabian socialist movement. They've even gone so far, the Fabian socialists set up their own school in the 20s in England called the London School of Economics. And one of the major financiers of the London School of Economics has been the Rockefeller Foundation.
And so my view of a lot of this is these are people who figured out how the system worked, and they're just like, okay, well, that's how the system works, fuck it. I guess I'll make $1 zillion. And so they learned some of the tricks that they've learned. Now, this might be a good place as we get into the 90s and the Clintons to start to throw in the 80s and George Soros. George Soros is emblematic, but he's also significant as a person. In other words, he is a billionaire elitist, right? He's a hedge fund manager, like Bill Browder and like a number of the other people we'll talk about in a second.
Understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
Yes. I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
Somebody else would be taking it away anyhow, so I had no sense of guilt.
Are you religious?
No. I don't feel guilty because I'm engaged in an amoral activity which is not meant to have anything to do with guilt, because we find it more convenient to operate without it.
This is Mr. George Soros, and he's going to be helping.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed videos.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
Oh, I'm sure it did.
It was actually probably the happiest year of my life, that year of German occupation. For me, it was a very positive experience. It's a strange thing, you know, because you see incredible suffering around you, and in fact, you're in considerable danger yourself. But you're 14 years old and you don't believe that it can actually touch you. You have a belief in yourself, your belief in your father. It's a very happy-making, exhilarating experience.
So I had to experiment, and it was a learning process. The first part was this subversive activity, disrupting. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
Now, let's talk about Soros for a second. Hungarian-born billionaire, hedge fund manager, currency trader, and a philosophy student. Serious philosophy student, and serious economic theorist as well. He was a student of Karl Popper, the philosopher. Once again, I want to point out that this intellectualism runs through a lot of these people. I talked about it with Herbert Marcuse a little bit, but I want you to understand that these are people who have an ivory tower background as well, and Soros is no exception, right? So Soros is a student of Karl Popper. Here's Soros talking about reflexivity, right? He talks about this concept, okay? I'm going to give you an ultra dumb guy version of it, just an ultra dumb guy version of it. So what reflexivity has to do with is basically that if you have two pebbles, the vibrations get much more complex. They start bouncing off of each other. Again, real super dumb guy thing. And Soros's point economically is that effects don't just have one set of effects. They have a multiple set of effects, and those effects affect other things. And so this directly affects something that Soros realized, which is if you put a tremendous amount of money into something, the way to control it is not to control one set of pebbles. Does that make sense? Because they're going to bounce back. The way to control it is to control both sets of pebbles. Okay? By the way, it should be pointed out that Anthony Sutton, in that clip that we showed earlier, I may show it again in a second here, talks about Hegel. Very important, again, philosophical underpinnings of this. The intellectual underpinnings are very significant. Hegel was a big influence on Karl Marx, and Hegel was the Hegelian dialectic, which is thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. And the way it's translated into politics, right, was that you put two sides together and then you create the solution, or you give people these false choices, right? So reflexivity, Soros's theory of reflexivity means that he realizes the way to control it is what the CIA would refer to as full spectrum dominance in information warfare. That means you can't just control one side. You have to control both. But he understood that you can't appear to control both. So if I said to you, Soros is a funder of the left or the right, you'd go the left, and you'd be correct. But Soros was also a funder of the Atlantic Council. Remember, I just talked about them a little bit. The war machine. And this is why there's no anti-war movement in this country anymore.
It was MoveOn.org, an organization largely funded by Soros himself. In 2006, MoveOn waged a campaign against Dick Cheney's Halliburton, dropping Halliburton's stock to a meager $26 a share. While MoveOn railed, Soros gradually bought almost 2 million shares of the deflated stock, eventually comprising over 2% of his total portfolio and establishing Halliburton as Soros' biggest investment that year. Almost suddenly, MoveOn's crusade against Cheney's war fell silent. Halliburton's stock value gradually increased, and Soros made another killing, almost $40 million in profit off of the very grouping he pretended to despise.
Soros went and he funded the entire left. When he went into Poland, he went in. And what he says in this interview with Charlie Rose is he talks about he's getting into philanthropy. And he says to Charlie, you know, the danger here is the corrupting effects of money. He said that is the danger. He talks about this with Charlie Rose, and it's fascinating because once again, like Bill Clinton, like I've described with Bill Clinton, to me it's sort of an important moment. It's somebody who goes, okay, that's the way the world works. Fuck it, that's what I'll do. It's important to understand because when Soros first went into some countries like Poland, for instance, he would basically buy every group. You can go look that up and you can see. He would just write checks to everybody. He's more or less done the same thing with the American left. But you got to understand that whole left-right thing is an illusion. At the end of the day, these people are smoking cigars together. Soros is at Davos. He's a hedge fund manager, right? He is an arch capitalist. In fact, the guy is an arch capitalist. But he understands how the game works and has worked since Cecil Rhodes and Milner's Playground and all those people that Quigley knew about. Soros understood how it works, and one of the ways it works is through foundations, charitable tax-exempt foundations, right? And 501c3s and think tanks. That's who runs the world. That's who runs the town right across Potomac from me where I work every day. That's who runs the world. It's the think tanks, do you understand? And Soros understood this. Soros got that. And he funded civil society groups, or NGOs, right? This became his thing. And he would fund them massively. And then when Ukraine happened, he funded a group called International Renaissance Foundation Network, established by investor and philanthropist George Soros. This is them. This is the group that feeds other charities and stuff like that in Ukraine. Okay? Now, this is also a key part of understanding how the world works. So let's go over the parts that we've gone over so far. You've got monarchy and empire at play here. Monarchy and empire then hooked up with the radical left that came out of the 60s as strained through Saul Alinsky. They learned to form political organizations and do community organizing. Saul Alinsky is the father of community organizing. Do you understand? And folded into this was charitable foundations and think tanks and civil society groups. That's what they're known as, civil society groups. I've talked to people who understand these issues well and who follow politics well, and they've never heard of the following. I just mentioned civil society groups. There was a program that was set up under Hillary Clinton's watch as Secretary of State called Civil Society 2.0. Civil Society 2.0 is open democracy. By the way, here's a big thing on it here. This is a Soros-funded group. Look up open democracy. By the way, Adam Schiff connects in there. This meeting with Simpson has nothing to do. Adam Schiff is a very bad guy. That's what I'm saying today. You're being fooled. You don't see the connection between, you notice John Solomon, controlled opposition. This is what you're facing. This is where the controlled opposition comes in. That's why I'm going through all this. I want you to see that people connected openly to secret societies that have rules like Chatham House rule. That's who really runs things. So here's Secretary Clinton announcing Civil Society 2.0. Civil Society 2.0 is a way to take your tax dollars, your tax dollars, and pump them into George Soros's groups. You see? These are the civil society groups. They were working closely together in Ukraine, in Kiev, through something called tech camps. George Soros funds International Renaissance and creates all these civil society groups. These tech camps train them, and I told you they used adaptive techniques. And I told you that in 2007, you remember, we were all pissed off about the bankers and what had happened and trying to figure out how they'd fucked up the whole economy, right? Remember that? Then Two things came out of that. Occupy Wall Street came out of that, and the Tea Party movement. Both of them terrified the elites, so they got co-opted very quickly. Okay? But they saw that what was going on in Occupy, some of these new techniques where people were using social media, that was new at Occupy Wall Street. Social media was brand new to communicate in protest and stuff like that. These tech camps are a way of teaching people about this. They were started, you can find the announcement online, I just showed it to you, but you can find the announcement online. Two things came out of these tech camps in the Civil Society 2.0 program. These tech camps were held all over the world. Nobody ever talks about this, but this is the way the world works. Go look it up. You'll see. I'm showing it to you right here. This is an official program, and it was teaching people how to use technology for activism. Two things came out of it. The Arab Springs uprising, which started as a more organic, real movement in Tunisia when a food cart vendor that started basically was an anti-government riot there, but they quickly got co-opted and used and led to things like the Syrian civil war uprising. Because people like Soros and people like the Clintons, specifically Hillary Clinton in this case, but Bill Clinton and the neocons and neoliberals that they have learned how in the modern world to adapt to tactics. So they applied the tactics of Occupy Wall Street. And that's why you had, in 2013, the Maidan protest. The Maidan protest, which started peaceful. Here's a video on the Maidan revolution, right? Let me point out, again, I want to point out how the world works to you. This is on Hromadske TV. Let's look up the Wikipedia entry. This is all confirmable. This is a good summary. Hromadske was started on 22nd November 2013. It was announced by a group of journalists, right? And it's registered as an NGO. We talked about how Soros and these other groups use NGOs. But I want to point out that this was started the first day of the Maidan, right? Hromadske, it turns out, was, one second, funding. According to an interim financial report, it was funded by the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Embassy of the United States. You funded Hromadske TV, and the George Soros International Renaissance Group. That's who funded this. Do you understand? Hromadske was media that basically covered, it would be as though when Occupy Wall Street popped up, if a new network popped up that day, and it turned out it was funded by the government. So this is what's happening. The State Department, the Obama State Department under Hillary Clinton, in association with George Soros, was funding things through Civil Society 2.0, but also through things like this. Propaganda explicitly in Ukraine. This is the way it was co-opted from the beginning, and the whole thing was set up, literally set up. You can see, go and you can trace down the documents. But you've never heard of Hromadske. You've just been fed the propaganda. You follow me? And nobody is explaining this to you, even though you can check it out all for yourself. This is what really happened. Hromadske did an interview with somebody, and the interview has been confirmed to me by Accurate, where he said, we're basically going to have to kill about 1.5 million people to have this work.
Until only a few months or years ago, we would have considered it impossible that someone calls for genocide in public, meaning the murder of an entire population. But that's exactly what happened on the 29th of April 2014 in Ukraine. On a main Ukrainian television station, Hromadske TV, the journalist Bogdan Budkovich from the newspaper Ukrainian Week propagated his view about how to best solve the current crisis in Donbass. he made the brutal statement that there were 1.5 million superfluous people who should simply be killed.
Donbass is not only a depressive region. There is also a mass of such big problems, and first of all, a big number of absolutely superfluous people live there. Believe me, I know exactly what I am talking about. If we speak of the Donetsk region, around 4 million people live there, and 1 to 1.5 million are just superfluous. What do I want to say with that? We don't have to understand Donbass and its claims anymore, but we should rather understand and pursue the Ukrainian national interests. And for this, Donbass should just be used as a resource. Regarding the understanding of the situation in Donbass, I think, although I don't have a recipe of how to do it quickly, I still know one thing. The most important thing to do now is, even if it sounds cruel, there is a category of people who simply have to be killed.
What they were concerned about when Ukraine went off, and the reason Russia, after the election in Crimea, helped them, one of the reasons they helped them, is because literally there would have been a massacre. And Hormazka, that's what they were planning to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland. Victoria just recently returned from Kiev and has an update on the situation there, as well as the U.S. government position. Victoria?
Still jet-lagged from my third trip in 5 weeks to Ukraine and my days in Kyiv earlier this week. I don't have to tell this crowd that these are historic and challenging times for the people of Ukraine. As you know, and as Roman said, I returned to Ukraine for my third visit in 5 weeks last Tuesday in support of these very goals, this time conducting parallel coordinated high-level diplomacy with EU High Representative Cathy Ashton with all of the key Ukrainian stakeholders. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals. The support of the people in this room is absolutely essential. We thank you for all you are doing. We thank you for your partnership all these years, and we look forward to continuing to stand shoulder to shoulder with you as we take Ukraine into the future that it deserves. Thank you very much for
This is your tax dollars at work. Your tax dollars was fomenting a coup in Ukraine, and it's not a shock. It's not a surprise. Again, this is not new. The Clintons didn't invent this. They understood how the game works. We've been fomenting coups across the world forever. That's what we've been doing, right? That's what we've been doing. Chile, just all over the place. The CIA is fomenting coups, as I say, and election interference. That's the reality. And as Smedley Butler said, look up General Smedley Butler and you'll find out who I'm talking about.
Smedley Butler, a U.S. Marine Corps General Major who was the most decorated Marine at the time of his death, stated it well when he wrote,
I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer. I helped make Mexico safe for American oil interests. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies. In China, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best that he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. War is a racket. It always has been. A few profit and the many pay.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee
the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff, or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee.
You have to understand how the world works. People like Hillary Clinton, people like Bill Clinton understand how the world works. The reason they started the Clinton Foundation is they understand the new world we live in of foundations. You dig? And that whole thing was created, that goes back to the Rhodes Secret Society people. That's where they used charitable foundations and journalism. Don't forget, they were Brits, but they created Atlanticism by diverting and distracting your attention, and by creating a modern world of a 24/7 propaganda culture, so that these stories, these true stories that I'm telling you, that are how the world really works, you don't see them. You think about Paris Hilton or Stormy Daniels or whatever people are, whatever. Let's talk about the Clintons' relationship with Russia. The Clintons, again, Bill Clinton, Oxford, by the way, one of the big things here is the secret societies, British secret societies, including, Rhodes scholarships, all come out of Oxford. So Clinton in the 70s is working with Strobe Talbott and David Satter. They prep him to go to Russia. At the time, Russia's communist. At the time, they didn't have a problem with that. These people, Strobe Talbott and Bill Clinton, had no problem with communist Russia. Then, as we know, the system of communism collapsed, was not working, in part because of Russia's military adventures in Afghanistan. Turns out that we're kind of taunted into, and people have admitted that, but I won't even go into that part. It helped drive the end of the Soviet Union. And there's obviously a lot of bad stuff in Russia, by the way, especially under Stalin, where tens of millions of people were killed. But don't forget, we were allied with Stalin in World War II, because whatever, right? I guess against a bigger threat, but they wanted to make Russia more of an enemy than there were. And the fact is, Earl Browder, Bill Browder's grandfather, spied for Stalin. So these are people who didn't really have a huge problem with Russia until after Putin came into office. And let's talk about why that is. Okay? End of the 80s, Russia's falling apart. You have Gorbachev, you have Glasnost, you have Andropov, you have the fall of communism, the end of the Soviet Union as such. But you had a problem, which is all the assets were state-held. Do you understand? All of the assets were state-held. So, and this gets into a very significant period. 90s in Russia. Bill Clinton's in the White House. 92, he comes in. By the way, he's elected with the help of a convicted felon named Brett Kimberlin, who was talking about how Dan Quayle, he had sold pot to him. That story was pushed by a guy named Cody Shearer, who married Strobe Talbot's, Strobe Talbott married Cody Shearer's sister. We'll talk about that later. Let me just put a bookmark in that now. Clinton gets elected with the help of Cody Shearer, Strobe Talbot's roommate. And then Strobe Talbott, of course, is in the Clinton administration working in the White House and the State Department. So, all of the assets of Russia, the oil companies, the TV stations, everything's held by the state. What do you do with them? Used to be the state running it. Who gets them now? And they decided to come up with a voucher program. This voucher program would say to every Russian citizen, basically, you get so many shares, because they were trying to be fair to people, except the elites figured out how to game the system. They realized that the people didn't really understand the value of this piece of paper. This is the shares that they got, right? And so what they did was they created a system where these people got absolutely screwed over. This voucher system. People were selling their vouchers for pennies on the dollar, right? That's what's going on.
In 1991, when the Soviet Union came to an end, Ukraine declared its independence right after the shadowy attempted coup of August 1991, Boris Yeltsin, he became president of Russia. And through various political maneuvers, unfortunately, the backers of the authors of the Shatalin Plan, the 500 Days Plan, the most radical schemes of deregulation, privatization, whooshed into the government of Russia in December 1991 as a group, and in January 1992 set out to implement the radical deregulation ideas.
Within 5 years of shock price decontrol, privatization of state industry, sell-off of military stockpiles, and opening the borders for smuggling of everything from raw materials, weapons, and drugs, Russia's economy collapsed. The labor force shifted from production to various forms of criminal activity. The living standard plunged, and the former Soviet region saw the fastest expansion of the drug trade and drug use in the world.
Я считаю, что степень коррупции в России полностью соответствует степени преобразования в России. Она не является ни больше, ни меньше. Вот чиновник имел возможность одной росписью определить, тебе это принадлежит, или тебе это принадлежит, или другому.
It was here, between sets, that oligarchs like Berezovsky managed to get their hands on new riches. Here that he was given control of Sibneft, Russia's third largest oil company, for just $100 million.
А сколько стоит? Вот, за сколько продавать то, что никогда не имело рыночной цены?
Я был категорически против и сейчас категорически против тех форсированных темпов приватизации, когда имущество гигантской страны буквально за бесценок распродавали или передавали своим.
За 100 миллионов получали собственность на компании, которые сейчас там стоят 15 миллиардов, 20 миллиардов долларов.
Но 100 миллионов долларов у нас не было. Были десятки миллионов долларов, больше половины суммы, которая необходима была, но всей суммы не было. И я поехал на Запад. Я встретился вот с господином Соросом в Америке, с многими бизнесменами в Европе, в Японии, с единственной целью получить либо кредиты, либо партнерство.
You can find this in a great article called The Harvard Boys Do Russia. This is key to understanding it. It's published in The Nation, published other places, and this talks about how a group of people connected to the Clinton administration, here, after 7 years of economic reform financed by billions of dollars in the U.S., right, which is true. So what happened was, connected to this Russia in the 90s thing were people like Larry Summers. And you'll find Larry Summers' name all throughout this article. He was the Clinton Secretary of Treasury at one point, was also in the Obama administration. Okay? You'll see that elite schools like Harvard are right at the center of this. This article goes into great detail about it, but what I want to highlight is other professors, including Jeffrey Sachs. Larry Summers was later the president of Harvard, so a lot of this connects to Harvard. And I'm going to point out that one of the guys was a guy named Jonathan Hay, a Rhodes Scholar. I'll just mention that. Was a World Bank consultant. Now, Jonathan Hay, by the way, was later convicted for the rip-off stuff that he did. No one talks about Jonathan Hay. He's now involved in Ukraine. Go look him up. You'll talk about how he used USAID, for work in Russia. And they did this whole financial scam that worked through US aid.
These organizations are Trojan horses, designed to appear as gifts, but containing secret trapdoors through which hidden forces can enter the country and covertly undermine the governments in question. This explanation only sounds outlandish to those who look no further than the organization's names and have no idea of their history of operations. Take USAID, for example. Created in 1961 by executive order, it's a U.S. government agency that seeks to end extreme poverty and to promote resilient democratic societies while advancing our security and prosperity. So why did President Morales kick them out of Bolivia in 2013? Because he's crazy and irrational? Or because USAID ran a program through its remarkably frankly named Office of Transition Initiatives that provided $10.5 million of funding for strengthening democratic institutions throughout the country, including in opposition stronghold areas? Was it paranoia on Morales' part? Or merely the recognition that mealy-mouthed rhetoric about strengthening democratic institutions is a thinly veiled euphemism for overthrowing the government, exactly as leaked diplomatic documents proved was the case for USAID's identically named program in Venezuela?
USAID was originally an agency created to provide humanitarian aid and disaster relief to countries in need. And throughout the 1980s and the 1990s and more into the 21st century, it's evolved into a political arm and a funding branch of the U.S. government for what they call promoting democracy. And it's actually now a part of U.S. counterinsurgency campaigns that involve the Pentagon, the State Department in terms of diplomacy and obviously war activities, and USAID is the third agency involved in counterinsurgency, and their goal precisely is to provide what they called aid for promoting democracy or stabilizing or helping a country through some kind of political transition or economic transition. In the case of Venezuela, Venezuela is a country that is oil wealthy, so it's never qualified for any kind of direct USAID help. Therefore, USAID has never had an office here officially, and they didn't actually come to the country and set up an office until 2002, right before the coup d'etat against President Chavez. And the documents, internal documents obtained under Freedom of Information Act reveal that the sole intention of setting up the office here in Venezuela was to aid opposition forces to eventually oust Chavez from power.
Should governments trust USAID after it was revealed that the agency secretly created its own social media network in Cuba for the express purpose of undermining the Castro government? Or when it was revealed that USAID had sent a team of agents to Cuba under the guise of health and civic programs to incite rebellion amongst youth, including creating a phony HIV prevention workshop that the agency itself described as the perfect excuse to identify potential social change actors? Or when it was revealed that the agency had attempted, and miserably failed, to infiltrate Cuba's hip-hop scene, to break the information blockade, and spark a youth movement of social change in the country?
A U.S. agency infiltrated the Cuban hip-hop world in an attempt to launch a youth movement against the government there. The secret operation tried to use Cuban rappers to build a network of young people seeking social change. But the Cuban regime caught on and the operation failed. In the process, the U.S. Agency for International Development unintentionally compromised a vibrant music culture that produced hard-hitting grassroots criticism of the country. Several artists that the agency tried to promote ended up leaving Cuba or stopped performing after pressure from the government.
In fact, USAID's Black Ops programs for undermining foreign governments go all the way back to the founding of the agency itself. Some of the lowlights include USAID's Office of Public Safety and its part in running a CIA front program for training foreign police in torture and terror tactics in Latin America. Co-funding, with the CIA, the opium-smuggling Shengquang Air Transport, a private airline for narcotics trafficker and CIA point man in Laos, General Vang Pao, and co-funding opposition groups in Ukraine prior to the 2014 coup, with Glenn Greenwald backer Pierre Omidyar, and, of course, George Soros.
George Soros, pleasure to have you on.
Same here.
First on Ukraine, one of the things that many people recognized about you was that you, during the revolutions of 1989, funded a lot of dissident activities, civil society groups in Eastern Europe, in Poland, the Czech Republic. Are you doing similar things in Ukraine?
Well, I set up a foundation in Ukraine before Ukraine became independent of Russia. And the foundation has been functioning ever since. And it played an important part in events now.
But this NGO Trojan horse problem is by no means confined to USAID and its associated organizations. Take the National Endowment for Democracy as another example. The official story is that the NED was created in 1983 by an act of Congress in order to encourage the establishment and growth of democratic development in target countries around the world in line with US foreign policy goals. The actual story is that the NED was created expressly as a front for funding CIA activities inside target countries.
The National Endowment for Democracy, really that's kind of heir to what we used to call the Covert Action Staff, the CIA. They fund all kinds of people who do color revolution type things, okay? And we know of about 65 projects that the National Endowment for Democracy had going in Ukraine.
A fact that Alan Weinstein, one of the members of the study group that led to the NED's founding, openly bragged about in the Washington Post. A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA, he was quoted as saying. Even more blatant is an admission by then-Director of Central Intelligence William Casey, who wrote a memo to the White House advocating for the creation of NED, but cautioning that we here at the CIA should not get out front in the development of such an organization, nor do we wish to appear to be a sponsor or advocate. The NED's participation in covert destabilization campaigns rivals that of USAID, and, like USAID, involves too many operations to detail them all here. Lowlights include bankrolling the Project Democracy program that became the core of Oliver North's secret government during the Iran-Contra years, manipulating the elections in Nicaragua in 1990 to oust Ortega and the Sandinistas, overthrowing the government of Bulgaria in 1990 and Albania in 1991, and backing every major color revolution of the modern period, from the Rose Revolution in Georgia to the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan and Orange Revolution in Ukraine a decade ago, to the recent, unsuccessful Electric Yerevan in Armenia, and many others in between.
What about Ukraine? I understand there are a few organizations that have been involved in Ukraine trying to disturb that government. Of course, we have visited on this subject quite a bit, but I didn't realize how much the NED is involved over there.
And this is a big issue because I think the argument could definitely be made that NATO should have ended after the Cold War, but definitely the National Endowment for Democracy should have been ended after the Cold War. Instead, they say, like with every government program, no, now's the time we need more. But in Ukraine, just this past year, this is an interesting article written by the president of the National Endowment for Democracy. He's president for life. Karl Gershman. I know this might shock you, but he's actually a Trotskyite. He was a founder and member of a communist breakaway party, Trotskyite Social Democrats USA. He wrote an editorial in the Washington Post September of 13, just before the events happened in Ukraine. And he wrote, as the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, he said, Ukraine is the biggest prize.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that Ukraine's choice to join Europe will accelerate the demise of the ideology of Russian imperialism that Putin represents, and Putin may find himself on the losing end, not just in the near abroad, but within Russia itself. So his real goal is regime change. He spelled it out just before all of these events took place.
Now,
these types of Trojan horse operations have been used hundreds of times in the past, and there is no sign that the deep state is ready to abandon the trick now. Quite the opposite. It worked during the Arab Spring, when even the New York Times blithely admitted that the leaders of the protests had received training and financing from groups like the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House. And the State Department blithely admitted that they spent $50 million helping activists in the region network, communicate, and organize with each other through Trojan horse NGOs like movements.org. The deception also worked in Syria, where leaked documents proved the U.S. had been providing millions of dollars of support to opposition groups in the country since 2006 through a variety of Trojan horse NGOs like the Movement for Justice and Development.
I've told you several times, this is the world we live in. We live in a world of think tanks and groups like this. This is the OCCRP. It's just a bad name, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Okay? Let's look at their site. Notice I'm showing you these group sites on their own. I want you to see them. I want you to understand how the network works. Nothing is conspiracy here. Nothing up my sleeve. Presto, look who we have here. Who is the Organized Crime Reporting Project funded by? It's the Open Society Foundation. That's George Soros, of course, and USAID, USAID. There we go. That's who's funding this. Your tax dollars at work. The Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project is one of the groups who put together Bill Browder's story. Do you understand? Your tax dollars at work. I want you to see how these groups fit in. And I want to point out USAID has been used long time to basically funnel money into projects to create political outcomes that benefit the rich and powerful and the elites, okay? And this talks about the World Bank, which is another mechanism they'd use. It talks about how Yeltsin was a puppet, basically a puppet of the Clinton administration, right? And keep people in it like Strobe Talbot, like Larry Summers. This is what they were doing. They were robbing Russia blind. That's what they were doing. The elites figured out that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of wealth that they could get, and they got it through all sorts of scams, right? The person who put the stop to that was Vladimir Putin. Don't take my word for it. Go look it up. Go look up the history. In the 90s, you had these powerful oligarchs. The oligarchs were scam artists. The initial oligarchs were all scam artists. The current round of oligarchs are more businessmen because the scams made billions for people like Boris Berezovsky, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was at one point the richest guy in Russia. Khodorkovsky is an anti-Putin activist. He wants Putin out because Putin's the guy who put a stop to what the oligarchs were doing. Putin was put into place by Boris Berezovsky and other people, these other oligarchs who were controlling Russia at the time and robbing it blind and causing huge economic chaos. Life expectancy was going down. It was killing people in Russia. And these Clinton-supported Yeltsin, right? Remember when he fired on the parliament with tanks? Remember that? You may not remember that, but that happened. And we supported the guy. Putin hasn't done anything close to that. The reason they hate Putin, the reason they want to make him out into a monster, is because the giant machine of propaganda that's been lying to your whole life, Khodorkovsky had lined up with them. He'd lined up with Soros. He'd lined up with the Carlyle Group. You can find that actually pretty easily as well. In that article in the New York Times I was trying to, but it was too slow, it talks about how he's on the board of advisors of the Carlyle Group. Look it up. Don't take my word for it. You've been lied to every day of your life. Everything you hear about Putin, almost everything you hear, comes through Khodorkovsky and other people connected with him. Khodorkovsky, in fact, financed something called PutinCon. It was held last year in New York. Among the people who were at the Khodorkovsky-funded PutinCon, let's bring that up, shall we? So here's PutinCon. Here's who's in the sessions, right? Let's stop right here. One of the people at PutinCon is David Satter. He was the guy who helped train Clinton when he went to Russia, helped him brush up on his Russian. He was roommates with Strobe Talbot. There's a reason I started with Oxford and said understanding Clinton's relationship with Russia, which is they were part of a group that was helping to rob it blind in the 90s, that they're supported by people. George Soros was Hillary Clinton's top donor. Let's look who else we have here. Here's James Kirchhoff. You probably don't remember him, but I do. You don't know who he is, but I do. Jamie Kirchhoff is a writer for the Daily Beast. Of course, he's hooked up with this group. These people all know each other. This guy works with Michael Weiss. I've talked about Michael Weiss briefly before. Michael Weiss is one of the main propagandists behind this whole thing. CNN, Daily Beast. He's an editor there. Henry Jackson Society. He's a fellow at the Atlantic Council. Remember, I mentioned Atlanticism before. Let's see who else we got here on PutinCon. Luke Harding. Luke Harding is the person who just wrote the lying smear story about Manafort and Assange. Molly McNew, you've heard of her. Let's see who else we got down here. Preet Bharara. There's Preet Bharara. There's Bill Browder. Preet Bharara and Bill Browder did a talk together. Preet Bharara, Southern District of New York, very significant. Here's David Kramer. Who is David Kramer? You may remember David Kramer, because David Kramer was the one who John McCain sent over to look at the Steele dossier, to meet with Steele. He could have just picked up the phone, I guess. I wonder what else was going on there. But David Kramer was the head of Freedom House, the Soros-funded charity. Of course, he's at that PutinCon thing. Freedom House was, by the way, part of what pushed the Magnitsky Act. But if you look up David Kramer, you'll also find out that David Kramer, who now is the head of McCain Institute, pled the fifth on the Russian dossier. He refused to testify against it. He pled the fifth about it. Very few people reported on it. Here's Hannity, God bless him, in this case, reporting on it. But then that kind of got drifted away. As we mentioned, in February 2014, the Obama administration helped to engineer a coup in the Ukraine funded by George Soros. Now, significantly, in April of 2014, right after the coup, the Obama administration announced a U.S. crisis support package for the Ukraine. And I got a couple things here. This is the White House's own site, fact sheet, U.S. crisis support package for the Ukraine. And here's from the Kiev Post, crisis support package. Among other things, it mentions, economics, rule of law, but they mention rule of law and anti-corruption. This is one of the things that they establish early. And this is really significant, as you're going to see soon, okay? Now cut to 2016. In February of 2016, the FBI sets up a permanent office at the newly created National Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Ukraine for the execution of international requests. Now, NABU plays a big part in the election of 2016 and the Trump-Russia narrative involving Paul Manafort. You remember that in August of last year, during the election, Paul Manafort is the chairman of the Trump campaign. And on August 14th, the group that we talked about in part 2, the FBI-created Ukrainian anti-corruption group, announces that Manafort's name appeared in a secret ledger and he got in cash payments. Within days, Manafort is out. Okay? Now, that's an impact on the election. The Trump campaign chairman being forced to resign over this is a big start to the Trump-Russia narrative, and it had a definite impact on things that happened. In the next video, I'm going to go back to slide 2 and show you some of the things that led up to that, just some of them. But let me point out that this is really important, that after the election, after Trump won, which he was not expected to do, June 27th, the anti-corruption prosecutor who made this announcement says that Manafort's name was not in the ledger showing as getting cash payments and that he's not under investigation. So in other words, after the election, they were forced to take back. This is a false story pushed by this National Anti-Corruption Bureau that's connected to the FBI. I just want you to see that this had an effect on the election. August 19th, Paul Manafort quit. And if you just scroll down not too far, it'll say the waiver reports about Manafort's own business dealings with Russian line leaders in Ukraine, including allegations of millions of dollars in cash payments. But what we know now is that on June 27th of this year, in a story that was almost just completely buried by the media, Bloomberg is one of the only people that covered it, they admitted that there's no evidence of those illicit payments. And we know that those that announcement came from a group that was set up by the FBI, right? That's what we talked about here. Now let's go back. What happened before that you weren't aware of, okay? So what happened to set that up was in March 15th, a DNC operative named Alexander Chalupa, who we'll be talking a lot about, began to meet with Ukrainian officials to discuss Paul Manafort. August 27th, she spoke with a group of 68 Ukrainian journalists about Manafort at this group, the Open World Leadership Center, which, by the way, was set up by George Soros. He's one of the people who helped found it. He was on the board of directors, at least, early on. And later, June 29th, again, this is during the election, the FBI and NABU announced that they are going to cooperate in investigations. In other words, when this announcement's made, there's no way the FBI doesn't know anything about it. They have to know about it because they had already been set up and they announced that they were going to be cooperating. There's somebody in the office. So that's a little bit of the background. We've heard a lot about the Trump-Russia narrative, as I'm going to show you that Trump-Russia narrative was actually created by Ukrainian advisors of Hillary Clinton. But what's clear is the Ukrainian government colluded directly with the Democrats to interfere in the 2016 election. Again, I'm not proving this here. Let's just go over the broad story, okay? DNC operative Alexander Chalupa coordinated with Ukrainian officials to discredit the Trump campaign and to drive the false Trump-Russia narrative. Chalupa coordinated with Ukrainians, official government people in Ukraine, and American journalists who were chosen by the embassy in Kiev and colluded with them at the Open World Leadership Center, then bragged to the DNC about it. Chalupa also worked with convicted bomber and leftist activist Brett Kimberlin. I'll talk more about that much later. Ukraine publicly opened an investigation and released the secret ledger, which we talked about last time. Manafort was forced to resign, and then they said that it didn't actually show that at all way after the election. So there's a quick overview of the Ukrainian interference in the election. I'm going to mention this article that was published in Politico called Ukrainian Efforts to Sabotage Trump Backfire. Kiev officials are scrambling to make amends with President-elect after quietly working to boost Clinton. This article by Ken Vogel and David Stern, not right-wing, not Republicans, not Trumpers, this article is sort of the Rosetta Stone of a lot of this stuff. And a lot of the information, I cannot stress enough, you need to read this article. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about Alexandra Chalupa is in there. So who is she? She's a former Clinton White House official. She worked in the Clinton White House. Longtime DNC consultant, been a consultant since 2004. She created the opposition research file about Paul Manafort. You can see that in the Vogel article. She coordinated with the Ukrainian officials about Manafort. Again, that's in the Vogel article. One of her sisters, Andrea Chalupa, has said that Alexander was running Trump-Russia research for the DNC on two different occasions, actually. Here's two different tweets from Andrea Chalupa. My sister led Trump-Russia research at DNC. That's pretty clear. And a few days ago, my sister, who was harassed for investigating Trump-Russia, experienced some serious tech glitch. We'll come back to that in a little bit because it's very significant to note that Alexandra Chalupa later denied that she was doing that to CNN. You'll see that later. Her other sister, Irina Chalupa, works for a group funded by Soros, and Irina Chalupa is also part of the Atlantic Council, another important organization that we'll talk about. Now, at this point, I would like to briefly introduce a number of other people who are important to understand in this whole thing, but I just want to go through them quickly. These are people that connect between the Ukrainians and the DNC, and they also connect in every one of these cases to the Atlantic Council. Again, we mentioned them briefly last time. We'll talk about them more coming up. Milan Verveer, ex-State Department official. She's a very close Hillary Clinton ally, has worked with her. She's on the board of directors of the Atlantic Council, and she's Ukrainian-American. By the way, she worked with Alexandra Chalupa on an event. You'll see her name mentioned in that Politico article. This is Viktor Pinchuk. He's a Ukrainian billionaire, close friend of Bill Clinton's. He's also a trustee at the Atlantic Council and an ally of George Soros, who's pictured here. Of course, Soros is the Hungarian-born billionaire, major funder for the Ukrainian Maidan Revolution, major donor to the Atlantic Council, and he, of course, was Hillary Clinton's top 2015 individual contributor. Finally, here's Evelyn Farkas. We'll talk about her later. You may have remember her in relationship to the Susan Rice unmasking story. Evelyn Farkas is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and she worked under Hillary Clinton as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, which means she's very familiar with Ukrainian issues. So these are a few more people to keep in mind in this big cast of characters. With the media obsessively focused on Donald Trump's supposed connection to Russia, looking for that, I just want to point out that when I say Hillary Clinton's connected to the Ukraine, you're going to see this is not picked at random, it's major. Many of her top allies and advisors are Ukrainian. This includes close friends, and the Clinton Foundation's largest donations come surprisingly from the Ukraine. Let's look at some videos, some web pages here. This is Adam Parkhomenko. He's the Clinton staffer who's devoted his life to her cause. He's a Ukrainian-American. I've been sparring with him on Twitter, and he's the one who set up the Ready for Hillary PAC that raised tens of millions of dollars. We've already talked about Alexandra Chalupa. This Yahoo article calls her one of the 16 people who saved the 2016 election. But the really big connections are with people like Viktor Pinchuk. Here's an article from Newsweek saying Hillary Clinton's big benefactor, that's Viktor Pinchuk, has trade links with Iran, or this one talking about her foreign friends. Now, when we talk about the donations, this is significant. If you had to guess who donated the most money to the Clinton Foundation, you wouldn't guess Ukraine, probably. It's a small country. You don't think of it as a big donor on stuff like this, but there it is. This is from the Wall Street Journal. The other person we mentioned last time, but let's just be clear on this, is Milan Verveer. Milan Verveer shares family connections. Right here, there's Milan Verveer. This is her listed with Hillary Clinton's inner circle on the Wall Street Journal, along with, Chelsea and Bill and Milan. She's a big one there. Also, at Georgetown, she and Hillary have this Global Women's Issues Institute that's been set up. She was actually a chief of staff. She goes back years and years with the Clintons. She was a chief of staff in the Clinton administration for Hillary Clinton. So she's as connected as you can be. So there you go. That is Hillary's Ukraine connections, not minor, big stuff. Now is as good a time as any to introduce another really important character, and that is this guy right here. You remember him from these slides here and here, Sergei Leshchenko. Sergei Leshchenko is a Ukrainian politician and journalist who features prominently in this story. It's fair to say that he's obsessed with Manafort. Stay tuned for a minute. I'm going to show you a story the mainstream media you're not hearing about Sergei Leshchenko, because you've never heard of him, right? Because the media doesn't talk about him. He's very significant. As I mentioned in these slides, he was the one who was behind this ledger that has now, remember, this is the same ledger that led to Manafort's resignation, where Leshchenko said he was paid these cash payments. Manafort resigns. Then after the election, the Anti-Corruption Bureau says, no, that's not accurate. Leshchenko's the guy behind that. He's also somebody who met with Alexandra Chalupa. He told Fox News that he met with Chalupa. I believe it may have been at this meeting with 68 journalists, although I don't know that for sure, but it seems likely to me, since that's a lot of Ukrainian journalists to come over. Remember, these people were handpicked by the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Now, when I say obsessed with him, for instance, here's an article from April 2017. And there's Leschenko. And he's now, again, he's a politician. He revealed an invoice with Manafort's letterhead. So he's the one making this. But when I say obsessed, here's the story you don't really hear about. He attempted to blackmail Paul Manafort, according to Manafort. You know, Manafort's been made a villain. You don't hear that Manafort's daughter was hacked. Her emails were hacked. Text stolen. Gee, that's a hacking. Who do you think behind that? I don't think it's the Russians. And that's the story you don't hear about. So this is Sergei Leschenko. He met with Chalupa. He's the one pushing for this. And by the way, he used to work for a TV channel owned by Viktor Pinchuk, who we've talked about in the last couple of videos. That the Ukrainian connections actually help explain something that's been puzzling to people, which is why the absolute obsession with Russia. Why have we spent months and months and months going after Russia? And understanding these Ukrainian connections helps explain it. Let's go a little bit deeper. You know, we already mentioned Alexandra Chalupa, and we mentioned her sister Andrea, by the way, both of whom have me blocked on Twitter. But it's important to understand that Alexandra and Andrea Chalupa were involved back in 2013 and 14 with the Euromaidan revolution. Remember this? They were involved with it. They set up something called the Digital Maidan. Here's a great article. George Eliason has done a lot of good work at WashingtonBlog.com. He makes a great point here that every article neglects to mention that Chalupa and her family are not Democrats. Instead, they're ultranationalists who wants to send the United States at war with Russia. And this is true. Alexandria and Andrea Chalupa started what's called the Digital Maidan. Now, again, Eliason's a critic of theirs. By the way, Andrea Chalupa is a writer in New York. She helped launch online video for Condé Nast, for AOL, right? So she's not an insubstantial person. This is Ukrainian Weekly, ukweekly.com, and it goes over the Digital Maidan. These are nationalist Ukrainians, and it mentions leading the efforts were, among other people, Andrea Chalupa, Alexandra Chalupa, and it said the Digital Maidan was basically an American way of helping out. I want you to see how and why all these people are connected. This was not people just at a conference, maybe talking. These are people who work together consistently. The Trump-Russia story, the hoax, actually began last year, 2016, in the run-up to the election. And it's intensified since Donald Trump won. But it was a key component of the Democrat strategy. And to understand why that is, you need to understand a few people who've been moving behind the scenes on this, people related to Hillary Clinton. First off, in a broad sense, you have to understand that Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State during the Obama administration, made a couple of very interesting foreign policy moves that pitted the United States against Russia in ways that I thought was stupid. I went to Lebanon in 2013 and I saw for myself that your tax dollars were being used to kill Christians and wreak havoc in the region. This was all part of the Syrian civil war, which was started as a result of Hillary Clinton pushing for the Arab Spring while she was Secretary of State, along with Barack Obama. I don't want to let the former president off the hook here. And the other big foreign policy move, though, but Hillary Clinton was deeply involved, and as she was in the Euromaidan. So the big thing I want you to understand here is that this Euromaidan revolution was set up by Hillary Clinton, but it was funded by billionaire hedge fund financier George Soros. He's a key player in a lot of this stuff, and he's one of those people who you see show up over and over and over again. Now, I mentioned Chalupa, and that would be Alexandra Chalupa, and I have another video later in that series where I explain who Alexandra Chalupa is and her importance. What happened is there was DNC Ukrainian interference in the election. And this is a story almost nobody is telling. And it's shocking because it's completely obvious. I mean, it's not even, didn't even start with my reporting. Ken Vogel in Politico, a mainstream publication that you can't go, well, gee, they're right-wing nut jobs, did a lot of big reporting on this. There's no question Ukraine interfered in the election, specifically the stuff that's going on with Paul Manafort. I got to point out that one of the things about this is it may seem a little complex and new to you, and that's because the media has been covering it up for a while, right? And what's interesting is you don't just have one billionaire involved here. There's actually multiple billionaires involved. And here's the thing about billionaires. They have a lot of money. And that means, I know, this is why you tune in. But the thing about billionaires having a lot of money, it means that they can get away with a lot of things and promote things. And there's basically 3 billionaires you need to know about to understand this. Soros is one of them, a hedge fund manager. Viktor Pinchuk is another one. Viktor Pinchuk, by the way, is a Ukrainian who was the biggest donor to the Clinton Foundation. I want you to see how all this stuff rotates around Hillary Clinton. And the third billionaire is a guy named Bill Browder. Let's bring up the stuff about Bill Browder. Hang on, because I'm blind. So Bill Browder is the billionaire. You've heard of the Russian lawyer, right? You've heard stuff about the Russian lawyer, and you're like, well, I'm suspicious. By the way, I got to point out something. Everyone is getting this wrong. The left and the right have fallen for the lies of a dude named Bill Browder. Who is Bill Browder? Here he is right here. This is him testifying under oath. We had a great guest on my radio show this morning talking about it. Bill Browder's a billionaire hedge fund manager. Okay, Bill Browder is the person, if you've heard negative stuff about the Russian lawyer, it came from this dude. Bill Browder's a guy, in articles like this, where he says the Russians killed my lawyer. His lawyer was a guy named Sergei Magnitsky. And Browder's the creator of the Magnitsky Act. And he's on Twitter, you can find him. He's a guy who now let's be clear on this, he's been called an American hero by John McCain. I want to point out John McCain keeps showing up on the wrong side of these issues, by the way. John McCain is awful. We dodged a bullet, actually, with Obama, in a way, not getting McCain. It could have been worse with McCain, I actually think. But I digress. Wouldn't have been a lot better. But McCain is on the wrong side of all of this stuff. And McCain has called Bill Browder an American hero. First off, he's not an American. Bill Browder was an American. He was born in this country where his father was head of the communist, his grandfather, forgive me, was head of the Communist Party back when Stalin was in power. Not a great time to be in charge of the Communist Party, but he was. But Bill Browder renounced his U.S. citizenship because he didn't want to pay taxes. He became a British citizen, and he's been deeply involved in financial stuff there. Do you call that an American hero? By the way, the media doesn't really mention that to you. If you look up Bill Browder, you'll see they don't talk about him renouncing his U.S. citizenship. You have to dig to find that one, because Bill Browder is one of the major people behind this whole Trump-Russia narrative. Now, the other thing about Bill Browder you should know, here's an article about him from 2004 in the New York Times. By the way, this is a more honest article than the more recent ones. And what it points out here, let me just cut to the end of the article. You can see he's a longtime supporter of the Democrat Party. See that? See, he's a longtime supporter of the Democrat Party. As is, by the way, George Soros, and as is Viktor Pinchuk, the Ukrainian, by giving huge amounts. Again, he was the biggest single donor to the Clinton Foundation. There you go. And Alexandra Chalupa, who I mentioned, of course, is connected to the Clinton White House. She worked there. She's deeply connected to the DNC. And so you have this, like I say, this universe of people floating around Hillary Clinton. I want you to see how and why all these people are connected. This was not people just at a conference, maybe talking. These are people who work together consistently. I want you to understand that you've been fed two narratives. Do you understand? You've been fed two lies. One is the Russiagate hoax, and the other one is the Spygate hoax. Fox has fed you the Spygate hoax because they don't want you to see that it's both Democrats and Republicans who are pushing an anti-Russia line to promote Atlanticism. The reason they're doing this is after the fall of the Soviet Union, the reason for NATO to exist kind of vanished. So what they've done is they've used NATO to put pressure on Russia because they still want to steal their oil. They still want to steal their assets. Bill Browder and Mikhail Khodorkovsky want to go back to the time before Putin when they were robbing Russia blind under the Clinton administration, under Larry Summers, who was in the Obama administration, under Strobe Talbot, who was in the Clinton, who was in the State Department under Obama. These people who showed up under Clinton also show up under Obama. They want to go back to the time when Jonathan Weiner was correcting corruption, was investigating corruption, was investigating this. He knew who Khodorkovsky was. Weiner understands how the game is played. He saw Khodorkovsky, richest guy in the world. By the way, if I get taken out by somebody, Khodorkovsky is just as likely. He's a guy who the CIA knows was connected with the Russian mob. The Russian mob are dangerous. By the way, a lot of people who reported in the around Browder, including Magnitsky, ended up dead, which is why they're investigating Browder right now for murder in Russia. I know it's unthinkable to some people, and I don't talk about it much because it's not conclusively proven to me. But I know who had the motive to kill Magnitsky. I know who benefited from it was Bill Browder was the guy, because Magnitsky was his auditor, and he was afraid that Magnitsky was going to testify against him because Browder was putting pressure on him. This is what the Magnitsky Act is about. Jonathan Weiner put this together, the Magnitsky Act, in order so that the elites could, anywhere in the world, suddenly seize people's bank accounts and stop them from traveling a place. This is why Mueller, who was put into place by Comey, who worked with HSBC, who is Bill Browder's backer. You have to understand that. Let's go to this again. Let's type in HSBC Browder. Now we're starting to get into the today stuff a little bit. Russian court rejects HSBC settlement deal in Browder case. This article is from last year. Nobody is telling you this stuff. You can find it if you type in the right search engine results. I want to point out that HSBC, if Bill Browder's story is true and he was ripped off, why is HSBC settling with Russia? Let's go back to the other article that I saw when I typed this in. The Integrity Initiative, Browder, and the HSBC connection. It's Patrick Henningsen over at 21st Century Wire. Bound to be a good thing. HSBC has to pay almost 2 billion rubles for the debts of Bill Browder. HSBC shutters Russia's Hermitage as Browder is sued in London. This is what's really going on. How HSBC got rich off of Russian corruption. It's interesting. It's a Daily Beast article. The Integrity Initiative. So I'm going to go into it skeptically, but there may be some good info there. You can never tell with this stuff. You can really never tell. You can find facts anywhere. Jim Comey was named to Bill Browder's HSBC Board of Directors. This is significant. These people are all hooked up, and they all know how this works. But you'll see some organizations show up time and time again. Soros Open Society Foundation, time and time again, along with other groups, Ford Foundation and so on. Mikhail Khodorkovsky shows up time and time again. The Atlantic Council shows up time and time again. Why does Khodorkovsky show up? Don't forget, he was in the oil business. So he's trying to sell Yukos oil to the West. Putin stops him. Meanwhile, Bill Browder is buying up shares of Gazprom, another oil company. Now, at the time, foreign investors, if you had a company that was 51% foreign-owned, you weren't allowed to buy shares of Gazprom. So what Bill Browder did was he set up shell companies, and those shell companies were buying it. Any of these articles, and you look them up, double-check the facts, don't take my word on anything. Everything I'm telling you is the God's honest truth, but don't take my word on any of it. So, by the way, both these guys are dead. Here's Berezovsky, who I mentioned earlier. Here's Safra. He was the original funder. By the way, a lot of this relates to Israel as well. Maybe a little beyond the discussion, but fits into it. See this article from New York Magazine, The Money Plane? This article goes into detail about how Russian banks, including Bank Menatip, owned by Khodorkovsky, were being used to launder money out of Russia to effectively get millions of dollars a day was going on these plane flights. Go read this article. Went through the Bank of New York, which is Safra's bank. Browder himself is doing this. Let me just read from the article. So while Browder portrays himself as the businessman who was a victim of Putin, to set the record straight, Browder's grandfather was a leader in the American Communist Party and stood for election. Scott, blah, blah, blah. He claims he went to Russia in 1995 to regain his roots. However, he ended up among Russia's highest profile investors linked to Safra, who in turn was linked to Boris Berezovsky, who's close to Yeltsin. Okay? That's what's going on here. Safra ended up getting killed after he sold to HSBC, by the way. I don't know if that's covered in here. Probably is. So what they're dealing with here was that Browder was trying to buy shares of Gazprom secretly using hedge companies, because what they were trying to do was they were trying to steal, again, I'll just say it bluntly. They were trying to steal Russia blind. And this is under the Clinton administration. Now, let's go to 2016. Donald Trump may get elected. He's talking about getting rid of NATO. He's talking like a populist, and he's a billionaire to boot. He's not really part of their club. And this alliance of former leftist radicals who've been Alinsky'd into fooling people, military-industrial complex, the traditional right, the deep state, the financial institutions, all of whom, by the way, use offshore banking, especially the deep state and the CIA when they're doing these coups and stuff like that. They're using secret offshore banking accounts, right? We've learned that time and time again. The other people using them are corrupt politicians and stuff like that. This is how the world works, and they're desperately afraid that Donald Trump will uncover it. Desperately afraid. If Trump figures out the truth, and he's got an inkling of it, but if he figures out the truth, the jig is up, because he is communicating directly with the American people.
CrowdStrike revises and retracts part of the explosive Russian hacking report. This via Liberty Blitzkrieg, where last week Michael Krieger, who runs Liberty Blitzkrieg, published 2 posts on the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike after becoming aware of inaccuracies on one of its key reports used to bolster the claim that operatives of the Russian government had hacked into the DNC. This is, of course, important since the DNC hired CrowdStrike to look into its hack and at the same time denied the FBI access to its servers. So the latest developments from Voice of America, U.S. cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike has revised and retracted statements it used to buttress claims of Russian hacking during last year's American presidential election campaign. CrowdStrike was first to link hacks of Democratic Party computers to Russian actors last year, but some cybersecurity experts have questioned its evidence. Then, on March 23rd, CrowdStrike walked back key parts of its Ukraine report. So in an email to VOA News, CrowdStrike noted that the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community concluded that Russia was behind the hacks of the DNC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, and, of course, the email account of John Podesta. Yes, The FBI agreed with CrowdStrike's conclusion, but the FBI didn't analyze the DNC servers because the DNC specifically denied the FBI access. Liberty Blitzkrieg wraps up by noting this is noteworthy in its own right, but takes on vastly increased significance given the serious errors in a related hacking report produced by the company. That report, now the company itself, CrowdStrike, kind of quietly backing away from. James?
It's an absolutely incredible thing to watch this narrative unraveling, but unraveling on the, in the back page of the second section of the newspaper, as it were, rather than A1. The headlines make A1. The retraction makes somewhere near the back of the third section of the paper, as always. So yes, just for anyone paying attention at home, or at least trying to pay attention, the fundamental central claims of that the DNC was hacked by Russia were based on this analysis by CrowdStrike, not by the FBI. The FBI did not get access to the DNC servers. They didn't let the FBI analyze the servers. They let CrowdStrike, this independent organization, come in and analyze the servers, and they gave that analysis over to the FBI. CrowdStrike is now having to retract their claims of Russian hacking in Ukraine because, people started challenging them and they realized, okay, we can't put up that charade any longer. But hey, so what does that say about that DNC analysis? And just to make it even more explicit, Michael Krieger had another article from last week that I'll link people to. What is CrowdStrike? In which he has this little passage. The firm's CTO and co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich, is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, a think tank with openly anti-Russian sentiments that is funded by Ukraine billionaire Viktor Pinchuk, who also happened to donate at least $10 million to the Clinton Foundation. Surprise, surprise, guys, it's all an inside operation to come to the conclusion that it was the Russians. This is where the whole Russian hacking meme nonsense is coming from, and it is being exposed as garbage. But again, it's the retraction is never the headline. It is still here, as evidenced by the bastion of fake news itself, Google News and its assortment of fake news outlets like New York Times, NPR, USA Today, and all the rest, that still continue to put this Russian hacking at the top and front and center every single day, putting it before the brainwashed masses every single day, day in and day out, part of the 24/7 news feed, and it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. And as always, let's look at the actual sources of information that are coming out here as opposed to the interpretations of those sources of information, because there has been some releases that have been largely hyped in the fake news over the past several days, including the December 29th joint analysis report from the FBI and the DHS, which seemed, again, like another authoritative nail in the coffin of this whole election scam. Clearly it was the Russians hacking, because look at this joint analysis report, which is talking about Grizzly Steppe, Russian malicious cyber activity. And again, it looks authoritative. It looks very impressive if all you do is glance at it briefly or read a headline about it. But if you actually look at the report itself, well, it starts with a standard boilerplate disclaimer, or so they say for these joint analysis reports. This report is provided as is for informational purposes only. The DHS does not provide any warranties of any kind regarding any information contained within. Well, I'll take that to the bank. So anyway, taking that into account, let's look at what is actually presented here. If you go and look at the nuts and bolts of this report, essentially what we have is a very impressive looking graphic that purports to show what actually happened when they're talking about quote unquote hacking the election. What do they actually mean? Well, there's a few different things going on here, and essentially you have some sort of malicious computer server somewhere sending out an email with a malicious link going to a recipient who then clicks on that link and gets a website that looks legitimate, and he enters his credentials in there, which then go back to that server, which then uses those credentials to access targeted systems and use malicious files and move through and gather information and exfiltrate that data back to the original server. This is spear phishing, and this is essentially, as far as anything that we can tell about what happened to John Podesta, this is what happened to Podesta. This is how we got the Podesta emails, and this is verified and corroborated by testimony from others, including server administrators that Podesta had corresponded responded to who accidentally told him, yes, this looks legitimate. He meant to say illegitimate. That's the official story anyway, and they're sticking to it. And so he entered his credentials in, and well, we know that his emails got exfiltrated back to the server. But the whole link here, the important part of this is this part. Adversary space, Russian intelligence services, grisly step, leverages this operational infrastructure. Now, all of this, again, can be corroborated. We know that something like this clearly did happen. We have nothing, absolutely nothing that we can go on to get this part. All we are getting is this nice graphic that shows it's these damn Russians in their hoodies sitting there on their laptops that are doing all of this behind the scenes. But this number one is kind of the most important part in all of this. And again, there is absolutely no data provided here. Obviously, you guys have seen this already, and, I'm sure CNN or other reputable mainstream outlets have told you all about Mueller indicts 13 Russian nationals over 2016 election interference. And there are some definite problems with that narrative that they're presenting even in that headline. Like, for example, one of the memes that they use to sway the election, Satan, if I win, Clinton wins. Jesus, not if I can help it. Press like to help Jesus win. You cannot make this stuff up. If I was trying to write a stupider idea about the election, and if I was writing some sci-fi fantasy several years ago about the 2016 elections and how stupid it would all become, I couldn't have made up anything as ridiculous as this, that this is why Trump got elected. This is why I didn't vote for Hillary, because I saw this meme. It's so unbelievably stupid, and no one is taking it seriously, and there are so many holes that you can pick apart in this, including the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, most of these Russian ad buys occurred after the election. But, don't let a timeline get in the way of a good story. Or, how about this one? Hillary Clinton outspent Russians 53-1 and lost. So, oh my God, they spent $1.2 million. Well, Clinton spent $800 million, and, she didn't win. So, absolutely, just top to bottom, this is just a stupid pack of lies. So, I think we know by now some of the things that we could say to counter this Russiagate stupidity that is sweeping the nation internationally at this point. And one of them would be exactly what James Woolsey admitted there. Of course we interfere in other people's elections. And this is not controversial in the least. In fact, this is a part of Russiagate that has been talked about before. Although not enough, not stressed enough, but yes, even Channel 4, America's long history of meddling in other countries' elections, or the LA Times, the U.S. is no stranger to interfering in the elections of other countries, or NPR, database tracks history of U.S. meddling in foreign elections, or Washington Post, the long history of the U.S. interfering with elections elsewhere. This is not controversial in the least. America has time and again, by far and away, the large majority of interference in elections over the past half century have been the U.S. interfering in elections. According to the research of this Carnegie Mellon researcher, there were 117 partisan electoral interventions between 1946 and 2000. That's around 1 of every 9 competitive elections held since the Second World War. And the majority of these, almost 70%, were cases of U.S. interference. But it gets worse. These are not all from the Cold War era. 21 such interventions took place between 1990 and 2000, of which 18 were by the U.S. 18 of 21 U.S. meddling in foreign elections in the 90s. And that's just from this database. And, how much can you really trust Don Levin and his database, and how accurate is it? And could you, I'm sure there are things to be contested with that data. But at any rate, it paints the broad picture that the vast majority of election meddling is done by the U.S. So that's the part of Russiagate that, as I say, isn't even, it's not even conspiracy theory, corners of the internet. It is as mainstream as it gets, and widely acknowledged and admitted, but hey, that doesn't matter. American exceptionalism, when we interfere, it's for good reasons. But when Russian-connected sites interfere in the election, or Russian-connected forces in any way do anything, then, oh boy, then there's some reckoning. But this is the part of Russiagate that I don't think is really talked about. Nearly enough, anyway. I haven't seen it really discussed very much. Here's a tweet from Aaron Mate. Damn you Russian bots with your widely read mainstream sources and your factual accuracy, referring to a Washington Post headline. Russia used mainstream media to manipulate American voters, pointing out that Russian-controlled Twitter accounts, Albright said, were far more likely to share stories produced by widely read sources of American news and political commentary. The stories themselves were generally factually accurate. This is the part that it boils down to, is that even if we were to swallow hook, line, and sinker the DNC story that it was a Russian, they hacked our emails, they hacked our database, and thereby hacked the election. Again, whatever that means. The only thing they are saying is these dastardly Russians have shown the people the truth, the actual real truth about what we were saying to each other. I mean, that is the point of all of this. It's the truth. And this is pointed out in some of the comments here, like, for example, Ludwig W. It gets better. The Washington Post was apparently the second most cited source by these Russian bots to manipulate American voters. RT was 19th. What do you make of that? So these Russian bots are spreading the Washington Post around like it's like wildfire, and RT is not one of the sources that they tend to spread, but somehow or other, it's, you know, there's Russian influence by spreading Washington Post articles. And I think this is the thing that really sums it up for me. The day has come. Accurate news stories threaten American democracy.
So all of these seemingly divergent groups we've been talking about, who all meet. This is not about left versus right. This is about you have been fed lies about everything your entire life. You've been led to think that the left and right are different, but as we talked about before, they're not. There's a key group of people connected to secret societies, groups that were started as secret societies that apply the Chatham House rule. All of that, all of these people connected are trying to steal Russia's energy resources. Khodorkovsky's again on the board of the Carlyle Group. He's an advisor to the Carlyle Group, which is the Bushes. Cheney's hooked up. And the thing, and the ultimate red pill, and I talk about it all the time, and I should just point it out. If you want to understand how this really works, I just point up Genie Energy. This is who's on the board. They own exclusive drilling rights to the oil in under the Golan Heights. Larry Summers, we mentioned him before, head of the Treasury Department, one of the Harvard boys who destroyed Russia. Mary Landrieu, Bill Richardson. Bill Richardson is currently with AFCO, Jonathan Weiner's lobbying company, does work for Khodorkovsky. James Woolsey, CIA director. Dick Cheney. Rupert Murdoch, founder of Fox News. You want to know why Fox News is not on your side? Look he's on the this is how the world works. Lord Rothschild. The Rothschild family, we talk about them real briefly. They don't hold as much power as some people think they do, but the Rothschild family goes back. Remember I said monarchs and empires? That's what this goes back to. The Rothschilds were basically the accountants for monarchs going back to Germany. That's what they did. Rothschild, Red Shield, I believe that means. And so the Rothschilds go back to literally working with monarchs. They've adapted to the modern world, so now they start Genie Energy. How do they get that oil under the Golan Heights? What the big impediment there is you need to take out Syria. You think Syria is because Assad's a monster? No. No, the monsters are the people we've supported. We created ISIS. I reported on this. I went to Lebanon in 2013. It was obvious. They have to lie about Syria because they want the oil.
At the lies that we see coming out of Syria right now in what can only be described as a concerted propaganda effort to whip up war hysteria once again for another humanitarian love bombing. So, let's see if I can paint this picture for you in a orderly fashion. Let's turn to this story from Moon of Alabama that was posted up late July 2016, where it noted that CIA rebels behead kid. and other U.S. successes in Syria, where it notes, among other stories, that a group of fighters under the rubric of Nur al-Din al-Zenki, moderate rebels, of course, because what other kind are there, yesterday captured a Palestinian boy of some 8, 10, maybe 12 years, taunted him, and accused him of fighting on the Syrian government side. The boy had no uniform on and had medical infusion tubes in his right arm, but they still insisted he was a fighter. The CIA supported moderate rebels, then behead the boy with a knife right on the back of that red pickup truck. And for those who are really interested, or for those who really need proof of it, there are not only photos and videos of the child alive, but also video of the beheading itself. This boy was decapitated with a knife right there on video. Absolutely unfathomably disgusting. So get a good look of these scumbags. These are the scumbags of Nur al-Din al-Zenki. They are child beheaders, who, of course, are backed by the U.S. government. As we see in this story from BBC News, which came out a couple days later, Syria conflict, boy beheaded by rebels was a fighter, where it notes that the sister of a boy filmed being beheaded by Syrian rebels has disputed a claim by a pro-government Palestinian militia that he was not a fighter. The Liwa al-Quds Jerusalem Brigade said Abdullah Isa was just a 12-year-old boy from a poor refugee family who lived in a rebel-held area of Aleppo. His sister later said on Facebook, well, that's journalism for you. His sister later said on Facebook that he was a Syrian from Homs who went to fight and defend his country. Members of the Nur al-Din al-Zenki movement are accused of killing him. The group said those responsible were handed over to a judicial committee and denounced the killing as a violation. The U.S., which has provided military support to the Nur al-Din al-Zenki movement in the past, said it was seeking more information on what it described as an appalling report. Here, you literally have the BBC taking this story of this child beheading and basically justifying it. Oh, well, he was a fighter. This 12-year-old boy was a fighter. Clearly, someone who was going to do dangerous damage to these brave and valiant U.S.-supported terrorists, right? Well, of course, they were just following the State Department line on that, as usual, being good stenographers for the powers that shouldn't be. If we can prove that this was indeed what happened and this group was involved, it would give us pause about any assistance or, frankly, any further involvement with this group, State Department spokesman Mark Toner told reporters. And in case you think, oh, well, maybe this was just in the fog of war, it was only a couple of days after the incident, the State Department didn't really know the details, maybe once they figured everything out, they ultimately denounced Nur al-Din al-Zenki and called them out as the child beheading scum that they are. No. This is from a press conference that was given a couple of weeks later, in which they were again asked to clarify the position of the State Department. Here is State Department spokesman Mark Toner being asked, so what does a group have to do to actually be taken off the State Department list of groups or organizations that will receive State Department funding? How about beheading a child? Would that count?
It's been said that the State Department is also investigating allegations. I mean, there's a video of this group beheading a 10-year-old Palestinian boy.
Yeah,
how are those investigations going? Has there been any result?
Yeah, so we did talk about that. We were looking into that incident. Obviously, we condemned if it were true. I know that the group itself said that they had also made some arrests and then set up a commission of inquiry into the incident. I don't have any updates at this point in time, but I can certainly check and get back to you.
So what does a rebel group in Syria have to do to not receive U.S. funds any longer? What is the line that they must cross? What kind of controversial incident must take place for a group to stop receiving U.S. funds?
Well,
here, Mark, let me give you a help with this answer. The answer might go along the lines of something like, well, I can't say specifically, but maybe beheading a child might be where we draw the line. If you're a child beheading terrorist scum, we might stop supporting you. That's the answer we're looking for here, Mark.
First of all, there's a lot of vetting of the Syrian moderate opposition that has already taken place. And it's not just by the U.S., but it's by... etc., blah, 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 moderate opposition.
I think you see where that answer is going. Anyway, of course he doesn't say that beheading a child will actually invalidate this group from receiving any more State Department assistance. And don't take my word for it. Please do go read through the transcript of this briefing and that question and answer specifically. I'll put the link in the show notes, of course, so you can go and check it out. But yes, they are unwilling to distance themselves from this group of child beheaders. So that's just the way things roll in Syria. And here's a pretty good example of how the media has gone absolutely bending itself over backwards and into pretzel knots, trying to get you to de-link yourself from basic human morality. Oh, it's all right, they beheaded that child because he was a fighter. But wait, it gets worse. Here's a video from a few days ago from Channel 4, which had a report on Inside Aleppo and talking about some of the Oh, wait, that's strange. This video was private. It was just up maybe 24 hours ago when I checked it. Why is it gone now? I can't imagine. Oh, is it because... Let's check it out. Luckily, this was preserved here. England's Channel 4 News featuring moderate war criminals. On October 4th, 2016, England's Channel 4 News posted this video. Aleppo up close with the rebels inside the besieged Syrian city. And it's a report about, these moderate rebels and how brave and valiant they are in fighting. And they're just a bunch of farmers and factory workers who have suddenly become, they were forced into this position of fighting for the... Hey, wait, some of those faces look really familiar. What's going... Yeah, there's that guy, and... Oh, right, there's the pic... Oh. Yes, literally. Channel 4 are interviewing and lionizing the child beheaders in their report. You cannot make this up. They are literally portraying the child beheaders themselves as the moderate rebels who are fighting for freedom in Syria. Literally interviewing these people. And let me guess, I'll let you guess how many times they bring up child beheading in this video. Oh, that's right. 0. They don't bring it up. They don't even mention, oh, by the way, these are the guys that were just busy chopping heads off of 12-year-old boys a couple of months ago. This is why it's private. This is why this is now a private video. They took it off their channel because, and I wish I could have shown this to you, but I didn't screenshot it at the time. It was massively, almost 100% thumbs down, and every single comment was calling out Channel 4 for portraying these child beheaders as valiant freedom fighters. Every single person in the comment section was denouncing Channel 4 for this. So no one was buying the propaganda this time around, but they still ran with it. They still went with it. They're now trying to distance themselves from it, apparently, but they had this report up on their YouTube channel. And this is just the way this propaganda rolls. Now, obviously, Aleppo has been one of the central parts of this whole Syria propaganda, humanitarian love bombing story for a while now. So if you need to get caught up on it, you might remember, for example, Aleppo Boy and this picture that went around the world and was on the front page of every newspaper with this boy in the ambulance. Well, Truthstream Media has a good breakdown of that story, and again, how it relates to the photographer who took this picture, who was also the photographer that they showed in that picture with the headband, who was taking a selfie with the child beheaders. This guy who is literally the guy who took that famous photo, literally taking selfies with the child beheaders. This story is so insane that it almost defies, it beggars description how they can just throw it in your face like that. But that's the way these stories roll. Another great source of information on what's going on in Aleppo, Christoph Gehrman at New Great Game, has this great tweet. You really should follow him on Twitter. He has great information, but this tweet alone is worth it. He breaks down what's happening in Aleppo. 2011, rebels find no support in Aleppo. The opposition couldn't get the people of Aleppo to rise up against the regime, so they sent busloads of people to Aleppo. These people would burn something on the streets and leave. Journalists would take pictures of this and broadcast it saying Aleppo has risen. So that was the phony uprising, quote unquote, in Aleppo in 2011. 2012, the rebels invaded Aleppo. And in 2016, the rebels are actively stopping people from leaving Aleppo because they need human shields for this humanitarian love bombing propaganda campaign. And of course, it's all blame Assad, because it's all Assad's fault somehow that the rebels are killing people and stopping people from leaving and creating phony uprisings in cities that weren't being subject to uprising. So that's really Aleppo in a nutshell. There was no support for the rebels. The rebels invaded the town. Now the rebels are stopping people from leaving, and they blame it on Assad.
What you're seeing is Trump is trying to be taken out right now by a group of people that are connected to these secret societies who really run things, who want to maintain monarchies and empire. And while Trump may mean well, they control the media, and they've spent the past 2 years gaslighting him.